Chapter 1948, I've come from the calm peace heaven. Lu Jia waved at Ling Han, and said, Brother Ling, come, sit. Even though the overall level of cultivation in the wide prosperity heaven was higher, there were still only very few monarch tiers. Thus, each of them was worth becoming friends with. Ling Han nodded in acknowledgement, and he was accompanied by Lu Jia to the location of the banquet. This was an elegant garden, and it was filled with all kinds of mysterious flowers and peculiar plants. There was also a pond in the middle in which there was a twin lotus that was giving off a refreshing fragrance. From time to time, some carps would also swim to the surface of the pond, and appear in the gaps between the lotus leaves. Huh! This is a heaven fortune lotus! Ling Han exclaimed as he saw the twin lotus. He had already committed all of the celestial medicines in the world to memory, so he immediately recognized this lotus. However, an expression of disappointment quickly spread across his face, and he said, however, its medicinal age is only 1 billion or so years, so it can only qualify as a pseudo-celestial medicine. Heaven fortune lotuses had to grow for at least 5 billion years before they could absorb enough regulations of heaven and earth and become celestial medicines. If they hadn't passed this age, they could only be considered as pseudo-celestial medicines. Of course, pseudo-celestial medicines were already incredibly valuable. Each of them could sell for an astronomical amount of star stones. However, few people would be willing to sell their celestial medicines for star stones. Generally speaking, people would trade them for other valuable materials or celestial medicines, or perhaps some high-level celestial techniques. Lu Jia had initially been wearing a proud smile. Generally speaking, only celestial kings had the right to plant and nurture celestial medicines. Yet, he already possessed one while still at the severing mundane tier. Just how astonishing was this? However, Ling Han's next remark made it seem as if he didn't think much about this pseudo-celestial medicine. This caused him to feel extremely vexed. Lu Han instantly held her hand to her mouth and chuckled. She had initially viewed Ling Han in a very bad light. However, he had proved that he was a mighty monarch tier. Monarch tiers were naturally proud people. Moreover, Ling Han was not only a cultivation prodigy, but he also possessed incredible talent in alchemy. Thus, she naturally viewed him with increased respect. When viewing someone else, if one possessed a mindset of dislike, they would definitely see that person as more and more dislikable. Even if that person spoke beautiful words, one would feel that they were trying to please others with claptrap. However, once this impression was fixed, they would see that person in a completely different light. The latter would seem to be more and more likable. Otherwise, Lu Han definitely wouldn't have chuckled upon hearing Ling Han's words. Instead, she would have thought that he was putting on airs. Brother Ling, your standards are truly so high. Lu Jia said with a shake of his head. He was clearly very speechless. Everyone sat down, and there were naturally servants bustling about to serve them with dish after dish of delicacies. A holy sun was hosting guests, so the quality of this banquet naturally wouldn't be low. The meat was celestial beast meat, and the wine was celestial medicine wine. Of course, the celestial beasts were only at the 3rd or 4th severance, and the celestial wines only possessed a single leaf from celestial medicines. With how valuable celestial medicines were, they naturally couldn't add too much of it. Even so, everyone was still filled with delight as they enjoyed this sumptuous meal. If it weren't for embarrassment, they truly would shout for another serving. Lu Jia didn't speak during the meal, and only when everyone was almost finished eating did he say, I invited everyone over for a very important matter. Dare I ask, Holy Sun, what is this important matter? Someone naturally asked. Lu Jia pondered for a moment before saying, a mystery realm of heaven and earth has appeared on the border between the calm peace heaven and our wide prosperity heaven. Inside this mystery realm, is a source power of heaven and earth. What? Source power of heaven and earth? This instantly captured everyone's attention, and they all wore expressions of emotion and eagerness. Source powers of heaven and earth were of the celestial king tier. Upon obtaining one could be regarded as invincible among their own cultivation level. If they, the king tiers and emperor tiers, obtained one, their battle prowess would also elevate by an entire level. Perhaps king tiers would become emperor tiers, and perhaps emperor tiers would become monarch tiers. This source power of heaven and earth is called the fiery flame lightning strike wood. However, not only has our wide prosperity heaven received this news, but the calm peace heaven has also received this news. A celestial king has deduced that this mystery realm of heaven and earth will open in about 1 year from now. Meanwhile, the fiery flame lightning strike wood will also finish maturing at about the same time. It will become a genuine source power of heaven and earth, and it will be ready for harvest. However, only those at the severing mundane tier will be able to enter the mystery realm of heaven and earth. At that time, the severing mundane tier cultivators from the two heavens will definitely engage in an intense competition. Upon hearing this, many people wore expressions of disdain. The calm peace heaven? Are they worthy of competing with us? I've heard that the calm peace heaven doesn't even have a single monarch tier. Any random monarch tier from our heaven can completely obliterate them. That's right. At most, they'll only be heading over to enjoy the atmosphere. Only the monarch tiers from our wide prosperity heaven will be true competitors for this source power. In the recent several 100 million years, the wide prosperity heaven had suddenly experienced rapid growth. Not only did it shake off the title of weakest, but it even pulled further and further ahead of the calm peace heaven. It was showing signs of entering the low-mid quartile. Thus, the younger generation of the wide prosperity heaven was extremely proud and haughty. They believed that the calm peace heaven would only have a few king tiers at most. Ling Han stroked his chin, and said, "Sorry, but I'm from the calm peace heaven." His words instantly rendered everyone speechless. How was this possible? A prodigy such as Ling Han was actually nurtured by the calm peace heaven? Brother Ling, you're so good at telling jokes. That's right. A prodigy such as Brother Ling is definitely the pride of our wide prosperity heaven. Many people immediately expressed their doubt. They all shook their heads. Ling Han couldn't be bothered refuting them, and he simply replied with a smile. Wuxia hurriedly waved his hand, and said, "No matter what, since our universal cloud sect is aware of this matter, we naturally have to give it our all to fight for the fiery flame lightning strike wood. The Holy Sun is right. We definitely have to win this source power of heaven and earth for Guanhua City," many people shouted. Regardless of whether this was possible or not, they would naturally have to sing praises to the Holy Sun first. Wuxia nodded, and continued, "Source powers of heaven and earth won't necessarily follow one just because they're powerful. Source powers are celestial king tier existences, so they naturally have their own requirements when seeking a master. Thus, our goal is to arrive before the source power of heaven and earth so that we can be considered by it. We only have one opportunity. If a source power of heaven and earth can't find a suitable master upon birth, it will escape through heaven and earth, and vanish from this heaven. At that time, only a celestial king will be able to capture it. Thus, failure will signify that we have to wait for countless more years until a second opportunity appears. In the beginning, I planned on inviting 5 people to form a 7-star dazzling moon formation with my younger sister and me. That way, we could increase our battle prowess. However, since Brother Ling has come, I believe that the 3 of us will be more than powerful enough to overcome any challenge. With a team of 3 monarch tiers, what challenges couldn't they overcome? Ling Han felt slightly apologetic, and he said, "I'm genuinely from the calm peace heaven, so I can only politely turn down Brother Lu's kind proposal." Ha ha ha. Ling Han's words instantly elicited loud laughter from many people. They felt that Ling Han was hilarious. Ling Han was truly rendered speechless. Why did no one ever believe him when he spoke the truth? "Brother Ling, you genuinely don't want to team up with us? Lu Jia asked with a serious expression. If it were just him and Lu Han, they wouldn't have much confidence in overcoming their competition. After all, the top 3 monarch tiers in the wide prosperity heaven were extremely freakish. Only with a team of 3 monarch tiers did he have enough confidence to rival the top monarch tiers in the wide prosperity heaven. However, this was simply rivaling, not defeating. Ling Han shook his head, and said, I've already stated my reason very clearly. Lu Jia was also doubtful about Ling Han's claim that he was from the calm peace heaven. After all, he held a deep-rooted belief that the calm peace heaven was an extremely weak heaven. Thus, he tried to persuade Ling Han again, saying, Brother Ling, if you're afraid that we might conflict and develop animosity over the fiery flame lightning strike wood, then there's truly no need to worry. I've already said. The source power of heaven and earth will choose its own master, so we're simply fighting for an opportunity to arrive before this precious treasure so that we can be considered by it. His voice was filled with sincerity. Chapter 1949, Counterfeit. However, it was useless regardless of how sincere Lu Jia was. This was because Ling Han was truly from the calm peace heaven. In fact, in Ling Han's view, it was completely pointless to group people according to the wide prosperity heaven or the calm peace heaven. After all, the source power of heaven and earth would actively choose its own master. That being the case, why didn't everyone cooperate to arrive before the fiery flame lightning strike wood? Wouldn't that be a better option? In any case, it would be useless regardless of how much they competed. However, it was a shame that no one would accept this proposal. This was a valuable treasure, so they naturally had to fight over it. Those who were powerful would make the rules. Lu Jia felt that this was a shame. However, Ling Han was insistent on rejecting his proposal, and he even persisted with the excuse of being from the calm peace heaven. This caused him to feel displeased and impatient, so he gave up on trying to persuade Ling Han any further. According to his original plan, he had to pick 5 emperor tiers to team up with Lu Han and him. That way, they could form the 7-star dazzling moon formation. This formation would most likely be strong enough to rival the top monarch tiers of the wide prosperity heaven. After picking 5 emperor tiers, the banquet continued, and the conversation moved away from cultivation. Meanwhile, Lu Han became more and more interested in Ling Han. There were few female monarch tiers, yet monarch tiers all had extremely high standards. They definitely wouldn't be willing to marry a man inferior to them. Thus, they would only have a very, very small pool of people to choose from. With her impression of Ling Han changed, Lu Han naturally felt that he was more and more likable. She wanted to become an intimate friend with him. Of course, being an intimate friend and lovers were 2 completely different matters. However, for a monarch tier such as herself, her lover would definitely have to begin as an intimate friend. Celestial Maiden Lu Han, I've heard that one can only have the right to chase after you if they defeat you, someone asked as they saw Lu Han exchanging whispers with Ling Han. They were feeling extremely jealous. In any case, Lu Han had said this herself. If one couldn't defeat her, then they wouldn't have the right to chase after her. Thus, if Ling Han wanted to chase after Lu Han, he would need to defeat her first, no? A look of displeasure spread across Lu Han's face. Why was this person so annoying? At the same cultivation level, only few people in the world can defeat Celestial Maiden Lu. No wonder Celestial Maiden Lu is still single even though she's so stunningly beautiful. Many people were feeling extremely jealous, and they all spoke before Lu Han could say anything. They were intent on keeping Ling Han and Lu Han apart. Ling Han simply smiled and continued to drink wine. He had only been speaking to Lu Han because she had been asking him about celestial techniques. He had also become interested, so he exchanged a few more words with Lu Han. He had no other thoughts. These people. Couldn't their minds be purer? Lu Han's expression darkened, and she suddenly blinked before revealing a beautiful smile. She turned to Ling Han, and said, "Brother Ling, why don't you have a spar with me?" Ling Han rubbed his nose. He wasn't underestimating Lu Han, but with his current strength, Lu Han most likely didn't have the right to spar with him. This wouldn't be an equal battle, but instead a question of how many strikes she could block. "Ugly sh*t, I'll spar with you," someone suddenly said. Ling Han looked over, only to see a youth striding over. He looked to be around 17 or 18, and he was as handsome as could be. Ling Han had seen many handsome people before, yet the sum of them wasn't even 1/10 as handsome as this person. Moreover, this young man looked extremely androgynous. If he changed into female clothes, he would definitely become a stunning beauty who could intoxicate many people. Coincidentally, Ling Han had seen this person in female clothes before. This was no handsome young man. Instead, it was Hunyou in disguise. With the skills of Celestials, hiding one's Adam's apple and shrinking one's breasts was as easy as could be. If they wanted to disguise themselves, it would definitely be hard to see through them. Of course, this was unless one could examine them with origin power. At that time, they would be unable to conceal the true structure of their body. Ugly sh*t. At least half of the people became enraged upon hearing this. This person actually dared to call Lu Han ugly sh*t. Didn't he know that she was the second most beautiful woman in the entire wide prosperity heaven? Only Xu Yarang, the holy daughter of the Black Flame sect, could suppress her in terms of beauty. If Lu Han was ugly sh*t, then would there still be any beautiful women in the world? However, upon seeing Hunyou, this young man was truly as handsome as could be. Although men and women couldn't be compared, everyone reached the same conclusion when glancing between Hunyou and Lu Han. That was, Hunyou was far prettier than Lu Han. Lu Han furrowed her brows in anger. This person actually dared to call her ugly sh*t before Ling Han. She clenched her fists in anger. However, upon seeing Hunyou, her heart couldn't help but flutter. She became slightly flustered and intoxicated. Both Hunyou and the Empress were paramount beauties who could intoxicate the entire world. When disguised as men, they could similarly intoxicate all women. Lu Han's anger instantly vanished into thin air. Her heart thumped in her chest, and she could even feel a warm blush spreading across her face. She had never believed in love at first sight. She more so didn't view herself as someone who was attracted by outward appearances. Upon seeing Hunyou, however, she couldn't stop her heart from fluttering. Regarding Ling Han, she only felt some slight admiration. Facing this young man, however, she truly loved him to death. She nodded, and said, "Fine, let's spar." She gracefully walked over. Hunyou glared at this ugly sh*t. She actually dared to seduce her Ling Han. She would definitely smash her into pieces so that she could never seduce Ling Han again. Xiu. The two of them leaped into the air, standing 300 meters away from each other. The more Lu Han looked at Hunyou, the more her body became limp and heated. This young man didn't appear mighty and strong. However, he was far too handsome. His eyes were extremely lively, and it was as if they could speak. Her heart fluttered and thumped against her chest. She decided that she would definitely let Hunyou win, regardless of how strong or weak he was. She had uttered those words herself, so she definitely had to abide by them. However, who said that she couldn't lose on purpose? However, her expression instantly changed when she saw Hunyou attack. So powerful. This wasn't a king tier or an emperor tier, but rather a monarch tier. Not only was she astonished, but everyone else was also stupefied. Monarch tiers were like lone stars above the highest of heavens. They were extremely few in number. Now, however, Ling Han had suddenly popped up, and now it was this handsome young man. Just what in the world was going on? Had monarch tears become worthless? Even though the fortune of heaven and earth had undergone a transformation in the wide prosperity heaven, leading to a sharp rise in the number of prodigies, it still hadn't reached such an incredible stage, right? Lu Han hurriedly unleashed her full power to battle against Hunyo. However, she immediately became flustered, and she fell into an absolute disadvantage. It was clear that Lu Han wasn't going easy on Hunyo. However, Hunyo was far too powerful. A pair of rock wings unfurled from her back, allowing her movements to be quicker than lightning. Meanwhile, there were large fish symbols on her arms, and these fish even had a single horn on their heads. They felt even nobler than divine dragons. Source Beast. Rock, someone exclaimed in astonishment. No wonder this young man was so indescribably powerful. As it turned out, he possessed the bloodline of the rock, a king-tier source beast. In other words, he had practiced the celestial king techniques of the rock. According to rumors, king-tier celestial beasts were at least at the 8th heaven. More heaven-defying ones could even reach the 9th heaven and peer down on the entire celestial realm. Hunyo became engrossed in the fight, and with a long cry, the projection of a large fish materialized behind her body. However, it had a pair of rock wings, and it was radiating with an aura of primordial nature. She was like a paramount being from the primordial ages, and it was as if she could suppress all matter from past to present. Boom! With a shudder, Lu Han was immediately sent flying. Her beautiful face became pale, and her hair also became slightly disheveled. A monarch tier was easily defeated just like that. Chapter 1950, Love at First Sight. Lu Han endured the boiling pain in her chest, and said, "I've lost." She accepted this result wholeheartedly. Hunyo felt extremely smug, and she said, "Ugly sh*t, you're mine in the future. You're not allowed to seduce any other men, do you understand?" She suddenly realized that just beating Lu Han up wasn't enough. After all, dying cinders might glow again, so this wasn't a comprehensive approach. However, what if Lu Han fell in love with a non-existent person? At that time, this ugly sh*t wouldn't try to seduce Ling Han anymore. She was truly very smart. A blush spread across Lu Han's face. By saying this, was he announcing his ownership over her? Just look, he was already becoming jealous, and not wanting her to have any relationships with other men. His jealousy was astonishing, yet she also felt that it was incredibly adorable. Her entire body became soft and limp. She lowered her head and nodded in obedience. Everyone was stunned upon seeing this. He had won over the second most beautiful woman in the wide prosperity heaven just like that? Holy fuck. Ling Han more so didn't know whether to cry or to laugh. He hadn't imagined that Hunyo would ignore his words and not stay at home. Not only that, but she had actually disguised as a man to capture the hearts of beautiful women. "Friend, how should I refer to you?" Lu Jia asked with a smile. However, his mind was filled with shock. Another monarch tier had suddenly appeared. Moreover, he hadn't received any information about them beforehand. This left him extremely astonished. Not only that, but this young man was also frighteningly powerful. He had defeated Lu Han in just a few strikes, and this reminded him of the freaks in the wide prosperity heaven. Hunyo shot a sideways glance at him before placing her hands on her hips, and saying, "What, are you interested in Nyo?" Fuck. Everyone was drenched in sweat upon hearing this. This demeanor, this tone. Which part of him seemed like a man? He was clearly like a mischievous young girl. Lu Jia involuntarily frowned, and said, "Friend, are you a man or a woman? What's it to you?" Hunyo glared at him, and said, "I'm warning you, don't have any indecent thoughts." Lu Jia's frown became even deeper, and he said, "Since you're a woman, why are you playing such a prank?" "Brother, what nonsense are you speaking? Lu Han immediately chided. Her face was filled with anger, and she said, how can he be a woman? Everyone was astonished upon hearing this. Had she gone blind? It was as clear as day that she was a female. Yet, she was still deeply attracted to her. Little sister, wake up. Look carefully, which part of her seems like a man? Lu Jia said in a frantic voice. Lu Han glanced at Hunyo, and she only felt like his handsomeness was making her heart flutter. Although he was slightly feminine, this was because of his androgynous nature. How was he a woman? These men were simply jealous. Just look at them. Which one of them was even 1/10 as handsome as this handsome young man? Hunyo became even more smug, and she said, girl, you're mine in the future. Ling Han shook his head, and said, Hunyo, enough with the nonsense. Hunyo didn't so much as glance at him, and she shouted, Hunyo. Who's Hunyo? Don't utter such nonsense. Everyone face-bombed upon hearing this. She had just been referring to herself as Nyo just then, so Hunyo was almost certainly her name. Her futile denial was far too obvious. Come on, don't misbehave, Ling Han said in a gentle voice. He had a habit of treating Hunyo like a mischievous glutton. However, Hunyo was extremely determined this time. If she saw someone as a threat, she would immediately rush over to capture their hearts first. That way, Ling Han would be safe. As expected of Nyo. She was far too smart. She continued to ignore Ling Han, and she gestured for Lu Han to come over. The stunning beauty was extremely shy as she walked over. The two of them walked side by side, with one of them breathtakingly handsome and one of them as beautiful as a flower. At a glance, they were like a match made in heaven. Brother Ling, is this person your friend? Lu Jia asked. Ling Han rubbed his nose and nodded in confirmation. He was speechless at Hunyo's actions. Brother Ling, only you can resolve this situation, Lu Jia said. He was extremely good at offloading responsibility, and he directly kicked the ball into Ling Han's court. The banquet continued, yet no one's mind was on proper matters anymore. They were all glancing at Hunyo and Lu Han. One was wearing an expression of impatience, while the other was wearing an expression of shyness. There was also an expression of love and fondness in the latter's eyes, and it was clear that she had fallen deeply in love. Love at first sight was truly a dangerous matter. Mo Shuang shuffled over with a gossipy expression, and asked, Brother Ling, is that your wife? Ling Han glanced at him and didn't reply. Then what should I do? Mo Shuang asked with a pained expression. Not long ago, Ling Han had still said that he would help him pick up some girls. Now, however, Ling Han's own woman had picked up some girls. Just what in the world was this? Just forget about it, Ling Han replied. Hunyo was determined to see this through, so there was nothing he could do about it either. However, we still reaped great rewards today. Mo Shuang said with an excited expression. After all, Lu Han only represented an impossible dream. He also knew that it was impossible for him to win her over, so he didn't feel disappointed for too long. How much did we make? Ling Han asked. His eyes also lit up. In terms of star stones alone, we made almost 7 million. In addition to this, we also obtained a large amount of pseudo-divine metal and a large number of alchemical pills. In total, they're worth more than 20 million. Mo Shuang replied in a quiet voice. Technically speaking, 20 million wasn't a huge amount for ascending origin tier forces. However, two measly severing mundane tier cultivators earning so much in a single day. This was an astounding number. Even though Mo Shuang had experienced many grand things before, he still couldn't help but be beside himself with excitement. Ling Han nodded, and said, we'll split it 50-50. How can we do that? Mo Shuang hurriedly shook his head, and said, Brother Ling, are you looking down on me? I essentially did nothing, and it was all thanks to Brother Ling's astounding alchemical talent that we earned so much. I can only take 30% at most. Fine, Ling Han said. He didn't insist on his original proposal. However, Mo Shuang had done much more than he gave himself credit for. If it weren't for his status as the seventh of the Mo clan, who would have proposed a gamble with Ling Han? Thus, giving him 30% wasn't much. When the banquet concluded, Ling Han followed Chen Dong and Ma Yong to visit Zhu Feng. Using a transfer formation, they covered countless kilometers and arrived beneath a towering mountain. This mountain was like an azure mountain from the paintings, with limpid waters flowing in its midst. The surrounding scenery was breathtakingly beautiful. They ventured along the mountain path, and it wasn't long before they arrived in front of a large courtyard. Ling Han immediately hummed in surprise. This was because this courtyard looked far too similar to alchemist Zi Cheng's residence. After entering, this feeling only became stronger. Even without Ma Yong and Chen Dong's guidance, Ling Han could have definitely located the alchemy room, the main hall, the left and right garden, and the medicine garden. By the looks of it, this third senior brother still hadn't walked out from Grandmaster Zi Cheng's shadows. Even the layout of his residence was heavily influenced by that of Grandmaster Zi Cheng's. Of course, this could also be viewed as Zhu Feng reminiscing the past. Perhaps he couldn't forget his experiences with Grandmaster Zi Cheng. It wasn't long before the three of them arrived at the guest hall. Ling Han looked over, only to see a middle-aged man sitting on the central seat. His eyebrows were thick, and his eyes were large. However, his hair was already all white. This appeared extremely conflicting with the rest of his features. The middle-aged man laughed heartily upon seeing Ling Han, and said, "Junior brother." With a single glance, Ling Han could already tell that this was Zhu Feng. It was clear that he wasn't an imposter. Genuine grandmasters would all possess an indescribable aura. The greater their skill in alchemy, the more obvious this aura would become. Ling Han also wore a wide smile as he strode over, and said, "Third senior brother." When he arrived before Zhu Feng, he bowed deeply, and said, "Ling Han pays respects to third senior brother." "No need for such formalities," Zhu Feng said as he helped Ling Han up. He didn't wait for Ling Han to bow even further. "I received Master's message saying that he accepted a new junior brother for the three of us just then. I was still thinking what this third junior brother looked like. Now, I finally have the chance to see you today." He turned around, and said, "Zijuan, are you not going to kneel and apologize to your senior uncle?" Chapter 1951, Punishment. There were two other people in the hall. One was Zhu Zijuan, and the other was Peng Huanyan. Zhu Zijuan's expression immediately changed upon hearing this, and he said in stubbornness, "Grandpa, I didn't do anything wrong." Zhu Feng flared up in rage, and he roared, "Brat, you disrespected your senior, yet you're still saying that you did no wrong?" Zhu Zijuan gritted his teeth, and said, "But my original intent wasn't wrong. I was just furious that someone dared to impersonate Grandpa's junior brother. Those who are unknowing can't be guilty, so I don't think that I did anything wrong." "Oh? Then did I also teach you to steal and swap out other people's alchemical pills? Did I teach you to cheat others?" Zhu Feng asked. Even his hair was billowing in fury, and his gaze was as intense as could be. He was an ascending origin tier elite, so Zhu Zijuan naturally couldn't withstand his might. With a thud, he had already fallen to his knees. He couldn't help but tremble. Ling Han didn't persuade Zhu Feng to stop. After all, regardless of how talented Zhu Zijuan was in alchemy, if his personality wasn't set straight, things would never change. If he practiced cultivation, he would only end up hurting others. If he practiced alchemy, he would only end up aiding evil forces. Neither of these was a good result. If Zhu Zijuan had been Ling Han's disciple or future generation disciple, he would have already expelled him for good. However, Zhu Feng was only his senior brother in name, so he naturally couldn't extend his reach too far. Zhu Zijuan went extremely pale. He could make excuses for everything else, but he naturally couldn't make any excuse for swapping Ling Han's pill out. He had ordered this, and Ran Fei and Shi Yong had already made a confession. He didn't even have the chance to find a sacrificial lamb. From a young age, you already displayed extreme talent in alchemy. By the looks of it, my hopes in you were too high, and I ended up forgetting to teach you how to be a proper person, Zhu Feng said with a shake of his head. He wore a pained expression on his face. He paused for a brief moment before continuing, as punishment, I forbid you from using the Zhu surname for 100 million years. Moreover, you're not allowed to mention that you're an alchemist from the Zicheng branch. You can travel the world as an ordinary person. Grandpa! Zhu Zijuan shouted. He almost jumped up upon hearing this. He was the most brilliant descendant of the Zhu clan, yet he was actually being sent into exile now? How could he accept this? Zhu Feng's gaze became sharp, and he said in a baleful voice, perhaps you want me to cripple your cultivation and banish you from the Zhu clan forever? Zhu Zijuan's face became as white as a sheet. He knew that his grandfather had already made up his mind. He could only slowly make his way up from the bottom again. He started to leave the hall, and each of his steps was extremely heavy. It was as if his legs had been filled with lead. He looked much like an old and ailing candle guttering in the wind. He was filled with disappointment and dejection. Zhu Feng's heart softened, and he almost called out to retract his command. In the end, however, he kept his lips tightly shut. Ling Han saw this, and he could only sigh in his mind. It looked like Zhu Feng was punishing Zhu Zijuan, but he was more so giving Zhu Zijuan some challenges through which he could improve himself. Zhu Zijuan was already talented enough in alchemy. However, alchemy required more than just one's hands. It also required one's mind and heart. He hoped that Zhu Zijuan could understand his grandfather's earnest care. If he could comprehend this within 100 million years, his future would definitely be bright and limitless. Otherwise, a petty and narrow-minded person couldn't walk far in either cultivation or alchemy. On the side, Peng Huanyan was also trembling slightly. Even Zhu Zijuan, Zhu Feng's grandson, had suffered such severe punishment. Thus, as he was a disciple, his situation was even more perilous. Huanyan. Sure enough, Zhu Feng glanced over after dealing with Zhu Zijuan. Peng Huanyan hurriedly shuffled over, and said with utmost respect, Master. You've also disappointed me greatly, Zhu Feng said with a shake of his head. Peng Huanyan fell to his knees in fright, and said, This disciple acknowledges his wrongdoings. Master, please give me an opportunity to reform myself. Where did you do wrong? Zhu Feng asked. Peng Huanyan pondered for a moment before answering, I was too arrogant and haughty before, and I viewed everyone else with contempt because I was a 3-star alchemist and also the disciple of a grandmaster. I got too far ahead of myself. Zhu Feng nodded, and said, What hurts me most is that not only were you wildly arrogant, but even your disciples were the same. This is a clear reflection of just how haughty and arrogant you've become. Peng Huanyan kowtowed, and said, I understand my mistakes. You can leave now. As your punishment, refine 1,000 cauldrons of alchemical pills. During this time, you're not allowed to take a single step out of this place. I hope you can focus all of your attention on alchemy, Zhu Feng said. This disciple understands. Peng Huanyan said. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. Even though refining 1,000 cauldrons of alchemical pills would take an exorbitant amount of time, at the very least, he hadn't been expelled. This allowed him to breathe a huge sigh of relief. Zhu Feng waved his hand to dismiss Peng Huanyan. He then turned to Ling Han, and said, Sorry for making you witness this embarrassment. No, don't say that. Third senior brother has focused all of his attention on alchemy, so it's difficult to avoid such situations, Ling Han said. Zhu Feng laughed, and said, let's not talk about these depressing matters. Is Master still doing well? He's doing amazing. He's raking in money every day, and even his hands are starting to cramp from counting money, Ling Han said with a chuckle. Zhu Feng couldn't help but grin upon hearing this. Grandmaster Zicheng was good at everything, yet he was far too attracted to money. No matter what it was, he would always try to think of a way to make money with it. The two of them chit-chat for a moment before Ling Han took his leave. Because he had already become accustomed to living at the Mo clan, he politely declined Zhu Feng's offer to stay at his place. In any case, Zhu Feng's grand celebration was in 3 days, so he would leave for the Three Blooms Valley after this celebration concluded. Upon arriving at the Mo clan, Mo Shuang had already collected all of Ling Han's winnings for him. He had placed them into several spatial god tools, and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was currently checking over them in delight. She was much like a female housekeeper. Ling Han couldn't see Hunyo anywhere, so he couldn't help but ask, huh? Where's Hunyo? Don't mention it. When she returned earlier, there was even a woman following behind her, insisting that Hunyo head over to propose marriage. As a result, Hunyo ran off again, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden said with a strange expression. Say, were women this open nowadays? They were even willing to marry other women? Ling Han faltered upon hearing this. He then shook his head. He hadn't imagined that Lu Han would be so deeply intoxicated by Hunyo. She wasn't even suspecting Hunyo's gender. Night fell, and Hunyo finally returned. So how did you deal with her? Ling Han asked with a chuckle. Hunyo pouted, and said, that was no fun at all. I'm definitely not doing that again in the future. She had initially thought that Lu Han would stop pestering Ling Han if she captured the other's heart first. In the end, however, she had become the one being pestered. It would be far easier to simply shoo them away from Ling Han. You told her that you're female? Hunyo nodded, and said, I told her. Ling Han also nodded. Since Hunyo had personally admitted to being a woman, Lu Han would most likely put this awkward episode of misplaced love behind her. Even though Lu Han would be angry and embarrassed for a while, this was still far better than continuing with the misplaced love. In the following few days, Ling Han kept an extremely low profile. After all, there was no one else for him to screw over. He exchanged all of his star stones for level 20 godly metal, yet this still wasn't enough to raise his divine demon sword to the 4th star. It was still a sliver away from reaching this level. The day for Zhu Feng's grand celebration finally arrived. There was a sea of guests, and even ascending origin tier forces had dispatched their grand elders to congratulate Zhu Feng. In fact, even the Universal Cloud Celestial King had specially sent Wuxia over to represent him in congratulating Zhu Feng. Ling Han brought the Empress, Hunyo, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, and Bewitching Maiden Ro over. With a handsome man and 3 beautiful women, they were naturally very eye-catching. However, on a day like this, even profligate and haughty people didn't dare to cause any trouble. At the most, they would only steal a few extra glances. Is this Uncle Ling? Someone suddenly asked in a sarcastic voice. Ling Han looked over, only to see a young man walking over. As this young man gazed at him, an expression of ridicule spread across his face. Chapter 1952, Asking for Advice. Ling Han simply glanced at him, and didn't say anything. This was his way of showing disdain. He couldn't even be bothered replying. The young man was angered. He raised his voice, and sarcastically said, I'm Lu Xing, the 9th disciple of Xiao Lixing, Grandmaster Xiao. My respects to 4th uncle. 4th uncle, you're not so arrogant that you'll ignore your own juniors, right? Xiao Lixing was the 2nd disciple of Grandmaster Zicheng. At that time, he had left for the distant dispelling cloud heaven, and right now, he had already become a renowned grandmaster there. He had been invited as an esteemed guest to the Return to Origin Palace, and his status was now extremely transcendent. Thus, this Lu Xing was naturally Ling Han's junior nephew. The three disciples of Grandmaster Zicheng had always enjoyed a close relationship, so their disciples would also frequently mingle with each other. Because Lu Xing was close in age to Zhu Zijuan, and because their personalities were similar, they had naturally become very good friends. They weren't distant with each other because of their difference in seniority. Lu Xing had come here representing Xiao Lixing to congratulate Zhu Zijuan. Because he had been caught up with some matters while traveling here, he had only arrived during dawn today. He had initially wanted to seek Zhu Zijuan to chit-chat and pick up girls, yet he discovered that Zhu Zijuan had already left Guanhua City. This had astonished him greatly. Even if Zhu Zijuan needed to leave, he should have done so after the conclusion of the celebration, right? Only afterward did he learn of the reason why. As it turned out, Zhu Zijuan hadn't wanted to leave himself. Instead, he had been forced away by someone. The perpetrator in question was none other than Ling Han, his new and unexpected fourth uncle. Just who in the world was this person? A stupid brat wanted to become his senior uncle? Lu Xing was a prodigy in cultivation, so even though he was still young, he was still referred to as uncle, senior uncle, or even ancestral uncle by many older alchemists. This was something that he had always been proud of and smug about. However, who would have thought that he would one day need to refer to a younger person as fourth uncle? He was extremely displeased about this. Moreover, he was also feeling extremely angry for his friend. Thus, Lu Xing especially walked over to obstruct Ling Han. As a junior, he naturally didn't dare to curse and slander Ling Han. However, he naturally had other methods to humiliate him. Upon hearing this, Ling Han took an extra glance at Lu Xing, and said, "No need for such formalities." "Fuck. I never paid my respects to you at all." "What do you mean no need for such formalities?" Lu Xing gasped in his mind. No wonder Zhu Zijuan had been forced to leave by him. Just look at Ling Han. His tongue was already so toxic, so his heart was definitely rotten to the core. Fourth uncle is truly successful for his young age. By the looks of it, fourth uncle is no older than 100,000 years old, am I right? An artificial smile spread across his face as he purposefully flattered Ling Han. The more he flattered Ling Han, the more painful his fall from grace would be. According to the normal flow of time, Ling Han was only around 200 years old. Cultivating under the reincarnation tree wouldn't age his physical body. However, after entering the time cultivation chambers, the Black Tower could also accelerate time by 1,000-fold. Thus, his true age right now was already in excess of 10,000 years. This was reflected in his flame of life. Although it was still raging and extremely lively, one could still discern the marks left by time. Of course, in the celestial realm, 10,000 years was nothing more than the blink of an eye. The age of elites was often calculated in tens of billions of years or even hundreds of billions of years. Hunyo glared at Lu Xing, and said, "Oi, your smile is so fake. I urge you to stop smiling. Otherwise, Nyo will smash you into smithereens." She still maintained her innocent nature, and she was as naive and innocent as a child. Of course, this was apart from wanting to have children with Ling Han. Thus, she would directly speak her mind whenever she came across something that she didn't like. She wouldn't hide her emotions, and she more so wouldn't feign politeness. Lu Xing involuntarily faltered upon hearing this. Hunyo's aura was far too overwhelming, and just her glare alone was enough to make his hair stand on ends. He almost wet his pants in fright. He was a prodigy in alchemy, but he didn't have any talent in cultivation. He wasn't even a king tier. Thus, how could he possibly withstand Hunyo's aura? After regaining his composure, he purposefully raised his voice, and said, "I've admired fourth uncle for a long time, so I want to seek some advice from fourth uncle regarding some difficult problems in alchemy." Since they were conversing in a corner, others wouldn't have noticed them before. However, by raising his voice, Lu Xing instantly attracted the attention of many people. Xiaofan was a 4-star Grandmaster. Although the holy land of alchemy in the eastern celestial realm was Alchemy City, this didn't imply that there weren't alchemists in other places. On the contrary, each place would have its own alchemists. It was just that 99% of these alchemists belonged to Alchemy City. Only very few of them were independent. For example, Xiaofan resided in Guanhua City. First of all, he could receive protection from the Universal Cloud's Celestial King. Second of all, it was comparatively easier to obtain celestial medicines in a Celestial King tier force. Thus, this kind of celebration was more enticing to alchemists. In the eyes of alchemists, advancing from the 5th refinement to the 6th refinement was a glorious achievement to be worshipped. Anyhow, who was Lu Xing? Many people recognized him. He was an outstanding disciple of Shao Lixing. Even though he hadn't practiced alchemy for many years, he had already advanced to become a 2-star alchemist. He had more so reached the 3rd spirit refinement, so he definitely had a huge chance to become an alchemy grandmaster in the future. Even Lu Xing had to refer to this person as uncle, so didn't this imply that he was a 4-star grandmaster? They definitely had to seize this opportunity to admire this grandmaster. However, when they looked over, they didn't see anyone who looked like a grandmaster. Apart from Lu Xing, there was another young man as well as 4 young women. Apart from being handsome and beautiful, neither of them looked like a 4-star grandmaster. However, those 4 women were truly very beautiful. Their beauty was about to melt everyone's heart. Right now, Lu Xing was looking at that young man. Gasp! That young man is actually Lu Xing's senior uncle? Is that even possible? Ling Han gazed at Lu Xing, only to see a hint of disdain in his eyes. He instantly understood that seeking advice was only an excuse. In reality, Lu Xing wanted to force him into a difficult situation. As a junior, he could naturally seek advice from his senior. However, this was also dependent on the situation, no? Moreover, a junior couldn't force their seniors to answer their questions. Whether or not the seniors answered was completely up to them. However, Lu Xing had purposefully raised his voice and attracted the attention of many people. If Ling Han refuted him now, it was inevitable that he would tarnish his reputation. This only seemed like a small matter, yet it was a clear reflection of Lu Xing's malicious intentions. "Fourth uncle, you're not afraid, are you?" Lu Xing asked. He laid another trap, preventing Ling Han from retreating. He was feeling extremely smug in his mind. "You dared to bully my brother, so just see how I dispose of you. Moreover, I'm doing everything within the rules, so who can accuse me of anything?" Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "Seniors naturally have a responsibility to explain difficult questions to juniors. What don't you understand? Ask away. This is child's play. Do you think you can stump me just because I'm a 2-star alchemist at the 3rd refinement? Quite the contrary." Ling Han possessed a reincarnation tree, so his theoretical knowledge was extremely vast and rich. He was simply lacking in practical experience. Lu Xing's smile grew even wider, and he said, "I've been refining the 4 forms bone transformation pill recently, and I'm slightly confused about the proportions of ingredients and how they should be used together. Can fourth uncle please explain this for me?" Everyone shook their heads upon hearing this. Just how many alchemical pills existed in the world? In fact, even 4-star grandmasters could only refine a relatively small percentage of alchemical pills. This was because mastering a new alchemical pill would take far too much time. Ling Han was so young, and it was likely that he hadn't even become a 2-star alchemist yet. Right now, however, Lu Xing was actually asking him about a 3-star alchemical pill. Wasn't he purposefully putting Ling Han in a difficult spot? Anyhow, Lu Xing's question about proportions was still okay. As long as one had read over the pill recipe before, this shouldn't be a problem. The memory of Celestials was naturally very good. However, to explain the details of how each ingredient should be used together? This was far too difficult. If one hadn't mastered the pill recipe, how could they explain this? Chapter 1953, Bring me tea, massage my back. Everyone turned their gaze to Ling Han. They were waiting to see how he would reply. If everything went as they expected, he would go beet red in the face, and then stomp off in anger and embarrassment. However, Ling Han's expression remained calm and composed. At the same time, he couldn't help but muse at this coincidence in his mind. This was because he had also started to investigate 3-star alchemical pills recently. He was investigating 5 in total, and one of them was none other than the 4 forms bone transformation pill. You've gifted this to me on a platter. Ling Han purposefully pondered for a moment, and it was as if he were racking his brains for an answer. Fourth uncle, it can't be that you don't even know about the 4 forms bone transformation pill, right? Lu Xing immediately said. This was a vicious blow. Now, hurry up and scurry off. Ling Han smiled calmly before finding a seat, and saying, before asking your seniors for advice, shouldn't you offer them some tea? TSK. You're even putting on airs now. Lu Xing chuckled coldly in his mind. In his eyes, Ling Han was trying to put him in a difficult spot instead. His intention was to wriggle free from his difficult situation. This was called defending by attacking. You have some skills. However, it's a shame that you've already fallen into my trap. How can I let you jump out? Yes, yes. Lu Xing answered with an expression of respect. He commanded the servants in the room to pour some tea, which he then brought forward for Ling Han. He appeared as respectful as could be. See? My performance is flawless, and there's nothing you can complain about. More and more people gathered in the surroundings. Some were simply here to see a show, while others were here because they were curious about Ling Han. They wanted to see if he was genuinely a skilled alchemist. After all, he was Xiao Lixing's junior brother, so he couldn't be underestimated. Ling Han crossed his legs before reaching forward with his right hand. Veins bulged on Lu Xing's forehead, yet he still gritted his teeth and bowed down as he placed the cup of tea in Ling Han's hand. I'll let you be smug for now. In a moment, I'll see how you cry. Ling Han started to slowly sip the tea. By doing this, he wasn't necessarily trying to mock Lu Xing. Instead, he was also recalling the refinement technique of the 4 forms bone transformation pill in his mind. This was a process of carefully thinking over the problem. After all, he had also just started to learn about this alchemical pill. His understanding of it was astonishing, yet he was still relatively lacking in practical experience. Regarding some detailed problems, he genuinely had to refine the alchemical pill himself before he could get a solid grasp on them. He was the alchemy emperor, so after pondering over this question for a moment, he was already confident that he could give a satisfactory answer. However, he still continued to slowly sip his tea in a leisurely manner. In fact, he appeared so relaxed that many people wanted to punch him. Others might not know, but Lu Xing was definitely feeling extremely frustrated at this moment. Ling Han was definitely doing this on purpose. He was forcing him to bow and nod like an obedient servant. To say nothing of the bulging veins on Lu Xing's forehead, even the surrounding onlookers were starting to become impatient. You're just drinking tea, so is there really any need to blow it 10 times before each sip? Will the tea burn you to death if you blow it fewer times? You're a severing mundane tier cultivator. If you're truly burnt by tea, then won't that be a massive joke? I'll endure this, I'll endure this. Lu Xing continued to repeat in his mind. As long as he endured this, it would soon be time for Ling Han to make a fool of himself. However, he hadn't expected Ling Han's counterattack to be so precise and ruthless. He had forced him to act like a servant in public. This was far too embarrassing. However, now that it had already come to this, he was naturally even more unwilling to give up. He could only grit his teeth and persist. After a long while, Ling Han finally finished drinking his tea. Lu Xing breathed a sigh of relief. The surrounding onlookers also heaved a sigh of relief. Ling Han was far too good at building up suspense. Ling Han handed the empty cup to Lu Xing, and Lu Xing naturally accepted it with respect. He then said, "Fourth uncle. My back is feeling a bit tight, help me massage it." Fuck. Lu Xing felt a strong urge to kill someone. Flames were about to erupt from his eyes. However, he gritted his teeth and continued to console himself, telling himself that he couldn't abandon all of his previous hard work. Otherwise, he would truly become a servant for nothing. He walked behind Ling Han. Thump, thump, thump. He started to massage Ling Han's back. The Empress, Hunyo, and the others were all wearing faint smiles. This person actually dared to challenge Ling Han. Didn't he know that Ling Han had been trained by the large black dog? Lu Xing was truly starting to feel some slight regret now. He had yet to humiliate Ling Han, and yet he was already being toyed around with. He was genuinely worried about whether his heart could take this any longer. However, he had already reached such a point, so how could he give up halfway? He forcefully suppressed the flames of raging fury in his heart. He was eagerly awaiting the time when Ling Han finally made a complete fool of himself. This was also the motivation that allowed him to endure this humiliation before so many people. Go on. Continue with your arrogance. After massaging Ling Han's back for a long time, Lu Xing forcefully suppressed his anger, and asked, "Fourth uncle, are you satisfied now?" "My legs," Ling Han said in a relaxed voice. "Fuck your mom. Don't need massaging," Ling Han continued. Lu Xing almost choked upon hearing this. If you don't need it, then you don't need it. What's the point of specially mentioning it? Are you trying to frighten me to death? Then fourth uncle, can you answer my question now? He asked in a respectful voice. However, he was actually gritting his teeth in anger. Ling Han coughed, and said, "My throat seems to be slightly parched again." Lu Xing's face involuntarily twitched when he heard this. His fists were clenched, and he could barely stop himself from punching Ling Han in the face. Ling Han looked as detestable as could be. "Forget about it. You've also worked very hard," Ling Han said. Lu Xing finally regained some composure upon hearing this. If Ling Han had truly ordered him to bring another cup of tea over, he would have definitely jumped up in arms. "Okay, let's talk about the refinement of the four forms bone transformation pill now," Ling Han said with a smile. He stopped toying around with Lu Xing. In his eyes, this was only a mini-game before the grand celebration. He would use it to pass some time. His expression became solemn, and he started to explain the refinement process. In the beginning, everyone was looking on with a faint smile. They were treating this as nothing more than a show. However, as time went on, their expressions gradually became serious. Ling Han explained profound concepts in simple and understandable terms, and his explanation of the refinement process of the four forms bone transformation pill was extremely in-depth and engrossing. Everyone nodded as they listened to him, and they felt as if they could immediately succeed in refining the four forms bone transformation pill if they were to try. Even Lu Xing's heart started to thump in excitement. Even though he had asked this question to screw with Ling Han, he did indeed have many confusions about refining the four forms bone transformation pill. Right now, however, all of his questions were being answered by Ling Han. Ling Han continued to speak, and everyone's expression continued to become increasingly earnest. This was because Ling Han's explanation had already exceeded the realm of simply talking about the four forms bone transformation pill. Indeed, he was already starting to explain other domains of alchemy. He was talking about the entirety of alchemy. Ling Han still had yet to become a grandmaster in alchemy. At most, he could only be considered as a small fry. However, he had already incorporated his own understandings while learning spirit refinement, and this had allowed him to forge his own path. Even though this path was still in its infancy, its foundation was much stronger than what most other people possessed. Right now, he was expounding these most fundamental principles. Everyone understood the fundamentals. However, few people could gain a deep and comprehensive understanding of them. "Hurry, come over here, there's a grandmaster explaining alchemy. Brother Fan, hurry up and come here. Otherwise, you'll regret this forever. Lin Qian. Hurry up and call your senior brothers and junior brothers over." The surrounding alchemists hurriedly retrieved their transmission devices to call their friends and disciples over. To alchemists, this was definitely a grand gathering that they couldn't miss. This was an incredible opportunity for them to elevate their skills and understanding of alchemy. This was because most alchemists didn't need to learn about difficult or profound concepts of alchemy. Instead, they would see bigger improvements by simply reinforcing the fundamentals. Thus, more and more people gathered in the surroundings, causing the small area to become so packed that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Chapter 1954, Revered by Everyone. Some people were unaware of this situation, so they couldn't help but falter upon walking over. What's going on? Why are there so many people? Cultivators naturally had no interest in alchemy. They couldn't understand Ling Han's utterances either. Thus, they would immediately turn around and leave. However, it was a completely different story for alchemists. They were immediately engrossed by Ling Han's explanations, and they would involuntarily sit down to carefully listen to his remarks. This was a very strange scene. There was clearly a sea of people, yet the surroundings were especially quiet and tranquil. Apart from Ling Han's voice, no one else made any sound. They all wore expressions of respect and reverence as they fervently gazed at Ling Han. It was as if they were worshipping a divine deity. In some sense, Ling Han was indeed a god in alchemy. Only when the grand ceremony was about to begin did Ling Han finally conclude his explanation. Everyone stood up with an expression of yearning. Regardless of who it was, they all bowed deeply to Ling Han. Even three-star alchemists were no exception. In terms of grasping the fundamentals, Ling Han's understanding had already exceeded that of most three-star alchemists. Thus, even three-star alchemists had learned a lot by listening to his explanations. As such, they couldn't help but pay Ling Han their highest respects. They were convinced that Ling Han would definitely become a grandmaster in the future. In fact, he might even create history and fill the gap in alchemy in the Eastern Celestial Realm. He might become the first five-star alchemist in 100 billion years. They couldn't help but go numb with excitement upon thinking of this. Perhaps today's gathering would also be recorded in history forever, representing Ling Han's initial rise in the Celestial Realm. Lu Xing was left wide-eyed with shock and disbelief. He had come here to humiliate Ling Han, yet after half a day, he had instead given Ling Han a chance to gain fame and renown? Just look. Just how popular and reputable was Ling Han now? Just how foolish had Lu Xing been? Just how incredibly foolish had he been? It was actually he who had pushed Ling Han onto this divine pedestal. He was so vexed that his mouth was about to go crooked. Pa! At this moment, he suddenly felt a heavy weight landing on his shoulder. He looked over, only to see a hand. Live an honest life, and focus more of your attention on alchemy. Cultivate your heart, and learn to be a decent person, Ling Han said. This was a piece of advice from the bottom of his heart. He wasn't a petty person. Lu Xing was already working toward becoming a 3-star alchemist at such a young age, and this was something that was worthy of praise. Thus, he advised Lu Xing to cultivate his heart and personality now. Otherwise, if Lu Xing hadn't been so talented, he wouldn't have even wasted his breath. He would have directly pummeled Lu Xing into smithereens. Lu Xing flushed red with embarrassment, and he didn't dare to look Ling Han in the eyes. Ling Han patted Lu Xing's shoulders again before confidently striding away. He didn't pay any more attention to him. Grandmaster Ling. Grandmaster Ling. Wherever Ling Han passed, the surrounding alchemists would all look over and greet him with a sincere smile. Even though Ling Han was still very far away from becoming a grandmaster, his explanations just then had elicited a strong feeling of respect from everyone. He was a selfless person, and he had shared his understanding of alchemy with everyone else. He had allowed all of them to reap huge benefits. Zhu Feng's 2 senior brothers had also personally come to congratulate him on reaching the 6th refinement. They pulled Ling Han over to chit-chat with him, mainly asking about how Grandmaster Zicheng was currently doing. Among Ling Han's 3 senior brothers, the older they were, the smaller their achievements in alchemy. For example, even though both his first senior brother and second senior brother were 4-star alchemists, they had only mastered the 5th spirit refinement, and had just barely entered the realm of grandmasters. Zhang Ning, Ling Han's first senior brother, most likely wouldn't be able to reach the 6th refinement. Meanwhile, Xiao Lixing, his second senior brother, still had a sliver of hope. However, it was actually Zhu Feng, his third senior brother, who had successfully taken this step first. He had already mastered the 6th refinement. Ling Han chit-chat with his 3 senior brothers for a long time. Afterward, Zhang Ning and Xiao Lixing both invited Ling Han to their residences. Ling Han happily accepted their invitations. However, regarding when he would visit them, this was hard to say. After all, he was also a very busy person. The grand celebration continued for 5 entire days. When it concluded, Ling Han hurriedly set off again, with his destination being the 3 Blooms Valley. Strictly speaking, the 3 Blooms Valley belonged inside the territory of the Calm Peace Heaven. However, wherever there were borders, there were naturally conflicts over claims. Moreover, the 3 Blooms Valley was on the outer edge of the Calm Peace Heaven, so it was only natural that it was disputed by the bordering heaven. Otherwise, the celestial king of the wide prosperity heaven wouldn't have accidentally discovered the 3 Blooms Valley and the fiery flame lightning strike would. Ling Han and the others set off, and bewitching Maiden Ro continued to shamelessly travel with them. This caused Hunyo to continually glare at her. How could there be such a shameless person? If it weren't for the Empress stopping her, she would truly want to pummel bewitching Maiden Ro into a pig head. She would then toss her as far away as she could. Under Hunyo's disdain, the group of them traversed through mountains and waters for almost 3 months. Only then did they finally exit the wide prosperity heaven and return to the Calm Peace Heaven. They then continued westward for another month before finally arriving at the 3 Blooms Valley. Is this truly a valley? Ling Han gazed at the swarming clouds and mists before him. This valley was as vast as a sea, and there was simply no end in sight. The clouds and mists were like the waves of the sea, slightly undulating as they flowed. This was a magnificent sight. Among this vast sea, one could see 3 distinct mountain peaks. They looked much like 3 blooming petals, and it was from this that the 3 Blooms Valley had received its name. Boom! A wave suddenly crashed over from the distance. This was a gust of wind. Upon wrapping around a cloud, it formed a peculiar and spectacular spectacle. However, the expressions of Ling Han and the others involuntarily changed. This gust of wind was far too terrifying. There were symbols of the great Tao swarming inside it, with each of them being paramount and profound. These were symbols that could easily shatter the heavens. Celestial King symbols, they all exclaimed in astonishment. No wonder the eternal prosperity Celestial King had said that even Celestial Kings couldn't forcefully obtain the rare opportunity of this place. Just a simple gust of wind was already like the frenzied attack of a Celestial King. Even an ascending origin tier elite would instantly die upon coming into contact with such a gust of wind. As for Celestial Kings, they wouldn't know which heaven these gusts of wind were equivalent to. In any case, only ninth heaven Celestial Kings could laugh before the might of heaven and earth and peer down on all matter. Only they could enjoy equal standing with the Tao of heaven and earth. Ling Han and the others attempted to enter the valley, yet symbols of the great Tao would flash into appearance from time to time. These symbols were powerful enough to obliterate all matter, so Ling Han and the others naturally didn't dare to recklessly push forward. Right now, no one could enter this valley. Celestial Kings could most likely enter this valley, but they definitely couldn't venture into its depths either. The will of heaven and earth was transcendent above all matter. According to rumors, there were very specific ways to enter this valley. One couldn't find any random place to jump down. There were petrifying regulations of gravity here, and the bottom of the valley was more so filled with a forest of razor-sharp stones that was imbued with the symbols of the great Tao. If one were impaled, they would instantly die on the spot. Even a physique as freakish as Ling Han's would be useless. Thus, they definitely had to find the correct entrance. Only by following this path could they safely arrive at the bottom of the valley. At that time, they could then look for the fiery flame lightning strike wood. After walking around for several days, Ling Han and the others finally found the correct entrance. At this moment, many people had already arrived before this entrance. Some of them Ling Han recognized, while some of them he didn't recognize. "Brother Ling!" Yan Xianlu and Lu Jia called as they walked over in unison. When they noticed each other, they couldn't help but falter and look over. What's going on? Why is he also greeting Ling Han? Ling Han smiled, and said, "Brother Yan, Brother Lu." "Huh? Brother Ling, how do you know him?" Yan Xianlu and Lu Jia asked in unison. Ling Han smiled, and said, "I took a trip to Guanhua City, and I became acquainted with Brother Lu there." "What? You're genuinely from the calm peace heaven?" At this moment, Lu Jia naturally understood everything. He immediately recalled Ling Han insisting that he was from the calm peace heaven. At that time, no one had believed him. In fact, even he had thought that Ling Han was purposefully making up an excuse to turn down his offer. He had even been slightly displeased at that time. However, who would have thought that this was actually true? Gasp! Chapter 1955, Shi Xiuwen arrives. "Brother Ling, you really are from the calm peace heaven?" Lu Jia still asked, unwilling to give up. Ling Han nodded, and replied, "As true as can be." Lu Jia's eyes flickered, and after a while, he only darkly said, "Then, after we enter the valley, it is inevitable that we will be on opposing sides. I will definitely not hold anything back." "What is it? You want a fight?" Hunyo immediately piped in. Her attitude was very fierce. Lu Jia opened his mouth to say something, but then closed his mouth again. In front of Hunyo, he really was not qualified to make any outlandish boasts. He looked deeply at Ling Han, and then turned around and left. Just as he had said, should they meet inside the valley, it was unavoidable that they would have a great battle. "You seem to have gained his resentment?" Yan Xianlu asked. Ling Han broke into a smile, and said, "It cannot be helped. Just let him be." "What happened?" Yan Xianlu asked again. Ling Han stroked his chin, and smilingly replied, "It's complicated." They were just talking when Lu Han suddenly ran over, and said to Hunyo, "Even if you are a woman, I still want to be with you." "Pooh, Yan Xianlu immediately spluttered. Even though he was known as a divine fetus that had been born on the celestial path, and was as calm and steady as a mountain, all of that had turned completely into nothing at this moment. He coughed endlessly, looked at Hun Yo, and then looked at Lu Han again, feeling completely blown over. Could it be that because it had been too long since he had roamed around, he was already outdated, and could no longer keep up with the trends? "You are so annoying," Hun Yo declared impatiently. "I know of a type of celestial medicine that can change gender," Lu Han said excitedly. "I have thought it over for many days. I like you, and I can't give up on you." "Nyo doesn't like you." Hun Yo grabbed one of Ling Han's arms. "Nyo likes Ling Han, and only Ling Han alone." "Ling Han." Lu Han's eyes swept over, focusing on Ling Han's face. Her expression instantly became icy cold, exuding a frosty killing intent. Since that was the case, then she would kill Ling Han off first. "Ugly, do you want to die?" Hun Yo, too, immediately blazed with killing intent. She was the most sensitive to killing intent. This ugly hag actually dared to show killing intent towards her Ling Han. Her first reaction was to kill her. Lu Han controlled her emotions, and only shot Hun Yo a dazzling smile before leaving without a second look backwards. She would kill Ling Han, but she would not do it herself. It would be too easy to do this. She only had to egg on the other monarch tiers to make a move, and with her beauty and status, it was completely a piece of cake for her to make others bite the bait. Yan Xianlu smirked, and asked, "Have I missed something?" It was no wonder that Ling Han said it was complicated. It indeed seemed extremely complex. Lao Song and Shan Jitong also arrived consequently. The monarch tiers from the calm peace heaven had all arrived, but because there was a larger number of monarch tiers from the wide prosperity heaven. At present, only half had arrived, and they were all ranked below the top 10. Even so, when over a dozen monarch tiers arrived at the same time, all of them exuded the kind of aura that came from a ruler of their own domain, capable of causing one to submit to them. In the future, these people would definitely become celestial kings, so naturally their aura soared. The two sides were clearly divided, and stood on either side of the entrance. Conflict did not erupt, nor did any immortal palace tier and ascending origin tier elites appear to create a massacre, and ruin the many prodigies that had been accumulated for at least 10 billion years. The journey to this mystery realm could involve a great many celestial kings. Whoever dared to cause trouble here would simply commit a suicidal action. Thus, the battles this time would only take place among the severing mundane tiers. Roar! A loud battle cry rang out, just like the roar of a dragon, but also seemingly like a tiger's roar, so loud that even the mist in the valley vibrated endlessly. A young man was rushing over from the distance. His appearance was extremely primitive, with only a fur hide wrapped around his lower body. His hair had been tied into several dozen braids, each braid tied with an ornament that was made from a jade-colored bone. He was clearly only just one person, but as he ran over, it was like a frightening giant primeval beast bulldozing over. Any person or object that stood in his way would only be sent flying and shattered. Shi Xiuwen. Yan Xianlu stood abruptly, his hands involuntarily tightening into fists. His eyes blazed with fire, his fighting spirit burning brightly. This person was Shi Xiuwen? Ling Han took a second glance at that savage, but as his gaze focused, it immediately drew the attention of the other. Shi Xiuwen also turned to look at Ling Han, his eyes as sharp as blades that slashed rapidly towards Ling Han. Ling Han was completely unconcerned, but a divine sword leaped out of his eyes, greeting the other's incoming attack. Boom! Sword rays clashed, simultaneously erasing each other. This clash seemed to have resulted in a tie. Shi Xiuwen bared his mouth in a grin. He had only used 1% of his battle prowess in this blow, but he was sure that the battle prowess that Ling Han had used was definitely more than that. Hence, it was natural that he was the one who was superior. All of a sudden, his vicious nature exploded. With him sweeping his gaze over everyone that was looking at him, a bout of muffled grunts instantly rang out. Even monarch tears were no exception. They all turned their heads away, feeling a fierce pain in their eyes, while king tears and emperor tears directly cried tears of blood. In the severing mundane tear, the superiority of monarch tear over emperor tear was the heaviest, which was equivalent to a young soul against the fourth severance. Hence, even if they were emperor tears, it was very normal that they still could not sustain the might of a glare from him. This guy was a little similar to Hunyo, extremely vicious and filled with a primitive air. Shan Jitong and Lao Song couldn't help but feel their heads go numb. So this was a monarch tier of the wide prosperity heaven? Too powerful. Facing Yan Xianlu, even if they were no match for him, they at least had the courage to fight. At least they could be sure that even if they were no match for him, they would still be able to calmly retreat after the battle. But against Shi Xiuwen, they were like lambs that had encountered a fierce lion, only worthy of becoming his prey. Even the two of them, monarch tears, were like this, what more the others? All of them had lost all their drive, and could only tremble in fear. This kind of person. How were they supposed to match that? Moreover, Shi Xiuwen was only ranked 9th among the prodigies of the wide prosperity heaven, so what about the 8 people ranked higher than him? It was said that the top 3 were all freakish prodigies, and could single-handedly destroy the heavens, and were indescribably powerful. My hand is itching, who will fight me? Shi Xiuwen called out loudly. While he was asking who would fight him, his eyes were fixed on Ling Han. In his eyes, only this person could barely stand against him in battle, and stepping on prodigies had always been his hobby. Delivering a blow to his opponent that would render his confidence to bits was one of his greatest pleasures. Wild ape, Nyo will come and beat you up. Hunyo leaped out. She was not the type to care about any form of rules, and would rather move directly. Boom, an image of the rock appeared behind her. Immediately, she was using her full power. Clearly, Hunyo was also excited by the thrill of battle, and gave Shi Xiuwen serious regard, treating him like a powerful opponent. So strong. Shi Xiuwen exclaimed in surprise, delighted. He gave a roar, and stepped up to meet Hunyo midway. With a tremble of his figure, a massive golden giant appeared behind him. It was brandishing a stone pestle that harshly crashed towards the rock. This was a clash between the power of divine fetus of both sides. From a certain perspective, this was a clash between 2 celestial kings as well, though both had just released a sliver of their full might. The heights of the celestial king tier did determine the strength of the divine fetus, but it was also affected by the cultivator's own cultivation level. It was impossible that an ascending origin tier divine fetus would be no match for a severing mundane tier divine fetus. Boom, the giant clashed against the rock, bursting into an intense confrontation. Great Tao shattered, turning into countless fragments of seals that shot out in all directions. Brilliant light filled the skies, and nothing else could be seen. Chapter 1956, Boost of Fortune. Xiu, 2 figures shot out of the blazing light whilst still fighting an incredibly intense battle. Every time they clashed, it would cause great Tao to vibrate, the mist to ripple, and a myriad of sights to appear. Ha ha ha, great! Great! Shi Xiuwen laughed madly, his braids dancing, his muscles bulging as multiple ancient seals appeared. That was his divine fetus showing its might, boosting his boundless power, as if he could split open the skies and break open the ground. He was a member of the Golden Giant race. When the world first began, a great many source beasts were birthed. At the same time, a large number of human-shaped beings also appeared, such as the Bronze Giant, Golden Giant, and Thunder Giant. These existences naturally were also Celestial King tier level. However, with the long passage of time, some were still alive, while others had died in battle, and still others had gone missing. For example, the Golden Giant race. The ancestor of this race had gone missing. No one knew if he was dead or alive. It was as if he had completely vanished off of the face of this world. But this did not affect the strength of his descendants. Once their bloodline awakened, they would become a divine fetus, and would be able to use the superpowers of the Golden Giant and possess boundless strength. At the same time, they also had astonishing defense. Shi Xiuwen roared loudly, activating his ancient power, and pushing his battle prowess to its limit. Fight! 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 Hunyou had also been spurred on by the battle. The image of the rock manifested endlessly, and looked like it was actually about to solidify. A massive rock had really appeared. As its wings flapped, its brilliance dazzled the ages. At this moment, both of them were caught in an irresolvable battle. What? Seeing such an intense scene of battle, whether they were the cultivators of the wide prosperity heaven or calm peace heaven, they all revealed an expression of shock and disbelief. Those from the wide prosperity heaven did not dare believe this reality. That was because they were too confident in themselves, and thought that any one of the monarch tiers from their side would be able to easily defeat the severing mundane tiers from the calm peace heaven, but now there was actually a young girl that could fight Shi Xiuwen to a stalemate. This naturally stunned them. It should be known that while Shi Xiuwen was ranked 9th, from 10th to 4th, their strength was actually very close. In fact, it was possible that Shi Xiuwen might be even stronger than the 4th. That was because when Shi Xiuwen had been in the ranking battles, he had lost his first battle to the heaven-defying freak that had eventually claimed the first place, so the former was heavily injured. And that was why he had repeatedly lost in the subsequent battles, finally falling into 9th place. But even then, he still wasn't the 10th, which was proof of exactly how strong Shi Xiuwen was. And those from the calm peace heaven also could not believe it. That was because a great many of them had heard that Hunyou had once defeated Yan Xianlu, Shan Jitong, and Lao Song. She was definitely the strongest of the severing mundane tier of the calm peace heaven, but she was actually unable to suppress the 9th strongest of the wide prosperity heaven. But after they had exchanged more than 1,000 moves, the difference between them was shown. Hunyou had the upper hand. Her hands were formed into claws, and as she brandished the seal of the rock, her destructive power was incredibly terrifying. Even if Shi Xiuwen had extremely strong defense as the Golden Giant divine fetus, he was still mauled under her sharp claws. What was astonishing was the fact that the blood that Shi Xiuwen shed was actually also golden. It was like liquid metal. The moment it landed on the ground, it solidified. Someone had even picked it up, and shockingly uncovered that this was actually pseudo-divine metal. This race was indeed astonishing. Liquid pseudo-divine metal was actually flowing in their veins, so their physique was extraordinarily terrifying. However, what was even more frightening was Hunyou was actually capable of tearing through this kind of physique with her bare hands. Just how astonishing was this little girl's destructive power? Ha ha ha, you are the first woman that has managed to wound me. Shi Xiuwen laughed raucously, and did not panic or lose his fighting spirit in the slightest just because he had been injured or had fallen into a disadvantage. On the other hand, his fighting spirit was soaring endlessly. Thus, I have decided to make you my woman. His fighting spirit blazed, turning into a hot cloud of volcanic ash. With its support, that golden giant became even mightier, a seal on its chest exuding blazing light, as if it had turned into a sun, and no one could look directly at it. This was a real prodigy. When met with a strong opponent, not only would they not retreat, but would instead improve themselves, and break through their limits, pushing their battle prowess which might seem like there was no way of improving further a step further. Hunyou also flew into a thunderous rage, and declared, "Niu is Ling Han's, you wild ape actually dare have designs on Niu, Niu is going to beat you to burst." Boom, her battle prowess also increased madly. Multiple veins appeared, and then suddenly struck out towards Shi Xiuwen with a sweep. The great battle continued. Though Shi Xiuwen had broken through his own limits, Hunyou was also a battle maniac. She similarly could break through her limits, and thus it was still Shi Xiuwen that was being suppressed. However, though Shi Xiuwen looked like he was about to lose, who knew if he had a frightening ultimate move that could turn the tables? Thus, falling from a disadvantageous position to a true defeat was definitely not something that could be done in a short while. Ling Han nodded. No wonder Yan Xianlu was no match for Shi Xiuwen. In truth, it was already very extraordinary that Yan Xianlu had managed to keep his life in the battle with Shi Xiuwen. However, if it had to be said that Yan Xianlu was inferior to Shi Xiuwen in physique, battle talent, and celestial technique, Ling Han would definitely disagree. The reason could only be the eternal prosperity Celestial King's judgment that Yan Xianlu had conveyed. The wide prosperity heaven had gained a boost of fortune from the heaven and earth. Thus, this generation's young prodigies were much stronger than those from calm peace heaven. Shi Xiuwen's strength, even in the western celestial realm, could probably be ranked among the top in the severing mundane tier. That was because Hunyou was such an existence herself, and he was only slightly inferior to her. Shan Jitong and Lao Song were both captivated, and had a feeling of despondency that they could not describe. They were indeed slightly inferior to Yan Xianlu, but everyone knew that Yan Xianlu had been birthed on the celestial path. Moreover, he had a master that was an eighth heaven celestial king, so even if they were inferior, they could still accept that. Furthermore, after advancing into the celestial king tier, the gap in physique would be leveled out. They were sure that they could catch up to him, and Yan Xianlu would no longer be able to shine all by himself ahead of them. But when they saw Hunyou and Shi Xiuwen's battle, their confidence had collapsed. They were all monarch tiers here, but the size of this gap could drive anyone to despair. Was the difference in physique really so obvious? Absolutely impossible. Thus, even if they had all become celestial kings, they would still be unable to match Hunyou and Shi Xiuwen. At most, they would only be able to manage a few counters before being defeated. The intense battle was still continuing, and more monarch tiers had also arrived. They naturally were from the wide prosperity heaven. When they saw Hunyou and Shi Xiuwen's battle, they all looked grim. Shi Xiuwen was stronger than he had been in the ranking battles, but this young girl was freakishly powerful. Who was she? Where had she popped out from? After fighting for a whole 3 days, Shi Xiuwen finally was still no match for Hunyou, and stepped out of the battle. "You are indeed stronger than I am," he declared loudly, but did not lose his confidence just because he had lost one battle. Instead, his vitality and energy both soared to the peak. "Within 100 years, I will seek you out for another battle. By then, I will defeat you so that you will obediently become my woman." After he said this, he turned around and left, not giving Hunyou the opportunity to rage. Hunyou was outraged, and was just about to set off in pursuit when Ling Han pulled her back. He shook his head at her, and said, "The next time he appears, I will beat him into a pig head so that he will never dare to be carried away by his delusions." Instantly, Hunyou was elated, wrapping her arm around Ling Han's arm, looking so completely innocent and lovable that anyone would want to spoil her. Chapter 1957, You Are Inferior to Shi Xiuwen. Immediately, a great many pairs of eyes looked over, their gaze fixed on Ling Han, looking envious. This young man was really too lucky. Hunyou was so strong that she could defeat even Shi Xiuwen, and she herself was world-shakingly beautiful. With such a beautiful partner, what else could he ask for? Moreover, just look at how ferocious Hunyou was towards other people, but towards Ling Han, she was as soft and gentle as water. Really, they simply couldn't say anything else. Meanwhile, Lu Han's beautiful eyes were dark, and the gaze she fixed on Ling Han was filled with resentment. If this man did not exist, Hunyou would be hers. She only had to eat the heavenly yang herb, and then gender would no longer be a problem. It was this man that had separated her and Hunyo. He had to die. Ninth Shi is really so weak that he can't even defeat a piece of trash from the calm peace heaven, a man who had arrived later scoffed. Seeing all those from calm peace heaven look towards him, he proudly declared, Fei Yun, am ranked 6th among the severing mundane tiers of the wide prosperity heaven. 6th. Though Hunyo had won, it had not been an easy win, and Shi Xiuwen was only ranked 9th. Then just how powerful would the 6th be? Hunyo bared her teeth, wanting to make a move again. She had a powerful move she could use, capable of destroying anything, but she could only use it once in many, many days. If there was no other choice, she would definitely not use it. This was a real trump card that could save her life. Ling Han stretched out a hand and pulled her back, saying, I'll go. The Empress's fighting spirit also blazed fiercely, but seeing that Ling Han said that he would fight, she repressed her fighting spirit. Trash or otherwise, are you the one to decide? Ling Han strode out. Who from the calm peace heaven is not a piece of trash? Fei Yun's expression was filled with contempt. Why don't you all just attack together? Just see how I will suppress all of you. Arrogant, he was really too arrogant. Ling Han shook his head. What good was it to bicker with someone arrogant? Just beat him up. Come fight then. Trash or not, we should decide with our fists. Trash, if you want to be beaten up, I will oblige you. In a flash, Fei Yun had already shot over towards Ling Han. He did not care who else was around them, and simply blasted forwards with a punch. There was a vague seal of great Tao on his fist, exuding a brilliance that could shatter everything. Instantly, all those who were not monarch tiers turned around. Once the force of this punch escaped control, the destructive power would be too terrifying. Ling Han shook his head, and swiped out a finger. It was a simple action, but seemed capable of suppressing the heaven and earth. You dare look down on me? Fei Yun roared furiously, and that seal of great Tao on his fist also became increasingly distinct. Clearly, the destructive power had increased further. Ling Han smiled faintly, and greeted the incoming blow with a tap. Boom! The first time the two of them clashed, the finger and fist had not actually made direct contact. Instead, there was still a gap of at least 9 meters between them. An intense crash had already taken place between the great Tao and origin power of both sides, and one after another, frightening power and regulations surged out, radiating in all directions. The Emperor tiers that had just fled were carried away by this power, and they involuntarily swayed as if they were drunk. They couldn't help but feel shocked. This was only the difference between an Emperor tier and a Monarch tier, so how could there be such a wide gap in their strength? This was natural. Both Ling Han and Fei Yun were in the 5th severance, which was equivalent to a Yang Soul elite, and their battle prowess was close to Yin Soul. How could severing mundane tier be able to easily sustain the shock waves that resulted from this level of attack? The fact that they had not been directly killed spoke of how strong these people were. Otherwise, if it had been normal 4th severances, they definitely would have been directly killed off. Ling Han withdrew his finger, and was extremely calm. That's all? Damn, you actually dare look down on me so much. Fei Yun's black locks danced, his fury rising to the point of madness. Ling Han shook his head. You have an overly high opinion of yourself. Your strength is completely inferior to Shi Xiuwen's. The ranking could not truly determine the gap in strength. When he delivered this strike, he had taken his own measures. Fei Yun was inferior to Shi Xiuwen. Previously, it was already said that Shi Xiuwen had been ranked 9th because he had encountered that freak who had eventually gotten the first place in his first battle in the ranking battles. As a result, he had suffered a horrible defeat, and was severely injured. In the end, he could only be ranked 9th. Of course, this did not mean that Fei Yun was not strong. As a monarch tier, Fei Yun was naturally strong. Furthermore, he indeed could be ranked among the top 10 of the wide prosperity heaven. Compared to Shi Xiuwen, there should not be too much of a gap, but how could top-tier prodigies afford that slight bit of a gap? After I beat you into dust, you will understand just how far the gap is between you and me. A black aura flowed out of Fei Yun's eyes, endlessly rising, and turning into a black scythe. Death Scythe. Someone gasped in shock, and even his expression had taken a drastic change. It should be known that the speaker was an emperor tier himself. I really had not thought that Fei Yun would use the Death Scythe so quickly. A monarch tier sighed ruefully. Who asked that brat to have angered Fei Yun? Another monarch tier, meanwhile, delighted in the misery of others. In the first place, there was a direct competitive relationship among monarch tiers, and now it was an exchange between two great heavens, so naturally they hoped that Fei Yun could kill Ling Han. Fei Yun once again charged out. He had not yet arrived when the massive scythe behind him was already slashing over. It was clearly only an image, yet was exuding the cold light of metal, as if it was solid. Ling Han's right hand curled into a fist, and shot a punch at the air. Crack! As if a sudden bolt of lightning had struck out of the blow, creases then appeared in the space, wave after wave spreading out in all directions. The Death Scythe was immediately affected. Its course had been blocked, and then damage appeared. Flakes of rust emerged before they floated down. Finally, it turned into countless pieces, which were taken away by the winds. Hiss! Seeing the force of this punch, everyone inhaled sharply. Even the monarch tiers showed expressions of shock. It had been such a frightening blow from Fei Yun, and yet had been destroyed by a casual punch. Ling Han's strength was practically unfathomable. Good! Good! Hun Yo immediately began to cheer. The Empress, meanwhile, clapped her hands. The two women would disregard everyone else, and do whatever they liked. For example, other women would probably now be embarrassed to cheer for their husband, right? But not them. As expected, you are inferior to Shi Xiuwen, Ling Han said with certainty. Fei Yun's hands balled into fists. He was so furious that a vein popped out on his forehead. It was very rare for a prodigy like him to be angered by anything, but he very much valued his ranking. It was one of the reasons to motivate him to tirelessly work on his cultivation. Determination to become the strongest. But now? Ling Han had actually overlooked all his effort, actually thinking that he was inferior to even Shi Xiuwen, who was ranked 9th. Then didn't that mean that he could only be ranked 10th? How could he tolerate that? You are courting your death, he said menacingly. His right hand shook, and a black scythe appeared, bearing a strong resemblance to the Death Scythe above his head. He used some kind of secret technique, and another image appeared, turning into a gigantic human figure that gripped that Death Scythe. Soul Slash, he roared, waving the scythe in his hand, and above his head, that human figure also waved the Death Scythe. Wang, an indescribable bizarre shock wave swept towards Ling Han. Ling Han was slightly surprised. It is indeed a slash on the soul. This blow is purely regulations taking form in an attack, and can also completely ignore physical defense, reaching straight to the mind, striking the soul and eliminating it. Unfortunately, this force is too weak. Ling Han showed an expression of disappointment. Though Fei Yun was only slightly weaker than Shi Xiuwen, this little bit of gap between them made him lose all his fighting spirit. He was just a piece of trash. Chapter 1958, Raped by a Spear. Ling Han released a battle cry, his figure charging out, completely ignoring the soul slash that had been unleashed by the Death Scythe. Reckless and foolish. Fei Yun smirked coldly. The slash of the Death Scythe arrived. Wang, Ling Han's robes fluttered by themselves, and it was to a very great extent at that. A few corners of his robes had been directly torn, even. It should be known that the robes he was wearing were nothing ordinary, but rather something woven from the combination of pseudo-divine metal and divine silk, possessing astonishing defense, but now a corner of theirs had actually been torn. This really was extremely terrifying. But what was more terrifying was Ling Han. He charged over, completely unaffected, his punch aiming straight for Fei Yun's face. What? Fei Yun's mouth gaped, soundlessly saying this word, and his eyes were filled with a strong disbelief. How could Ling Han have blocked this blow so easily? But whether Fei Yun accepted it or not, and believed it or not, Ling Han's fist was already close at hand. Humph! Brandishing his scythe, Fei Yun met the incoming blow. Wanting to use bare hands to face his celestial tool? What a joke! Even though this scythe was only a 4-star pseudo-celestial tool, it had been sharpened by a celestial king, and had just a sliver of the might of a celestial king. It was incredibly sharp, and had indirectly increased his battle prowess. Come, see if I won't slice off your fist, and we'll see if you will still move your hands unnecessarily. Ling Han saw this, but he still maintained his posture of delivering a punch without change. However, he did begin to channel the Xianin source water. Pang! The scythe slashed over, landing on Ling Han's wrist, and creating a clash of great Tao and a conflict of regulations. Countless seals were torn to bits, but Ling Han's fist was unscathed. He pierced through all this, and continued to deliver his attack towards Fei Yun. Freak! This time, Fei Yun was really stunned. The weapon had been sharpened by a celestial king, and still couldn't slice off Ling Han's wrist. Have your defenses been strengthened by a celestial king? Of course not. That was because the Xianin source water had shown its might. This was a source power of heaven and earth. Though it was limited by Ling Han's own cultivation level, could Fei Yun really unleash the full might of a celestial king? Of course not. Moreover, only a sliver of his power had been boosted by a celestial king, while the Xianin source water was Ling Han's own source power. How could it compare? Thus, since both sides had been weakened, Ling Han naturally was unharmed. Pang! The punch blasted, and landed on Fei Yun's body, sending his whole person flying. Ling Han shot out, catching up to him with a single step. Again, another punch flew out. Pang! Fei Yun's figure instantly flew upwards into the skies. Pang! 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 Ling Han caught up, and continued the barrage of blows. Fei Yun was really deserving of being a top-tier monarch tier. Even if he wasn't, he should be very close to it. His whole person curled into a ball, his hands covering his face, and guarding this spot, which was also the most important region. This was enough to ensure he did not sustain heavy injury. Ling Han had a great many ways to pierce through this defense, like the 9 heavens flame, the Xianin source water, or using the 3 types of power of regulation that the Black Tower had, but against this kind of trash, did he have to use such high-level techniques? You want to be a coward, right? Fine. He shot out a foot. Pang! Fei Yun was instantly sent flying madly into the skies. Then, Ling Han summoned an iron spear. This was the wager that Mo Shuang had given to him, a pseudo-celestial tool previously owned by someone he did not know. Ling Han used the power of space. His figure flashed, and crossed the dimension of space. In a few moves, he caught up to Fei Yun. Then, he struck out the spear in a direct stab, aimed straight at the ladders behind. No! Though Fei Yun was grabbing his head, when the divine sense of a celestial expanded, what difference did it have with witnessing it with his own eyes? This spear was going to rape his A*S. His face had turned green. In complete public, in front of the eyes of many, if his A*S was raped by a spear, just how would he be able to continue living? However, for the sake of protecting his vital points, he had curled himself into a tight ball, so how could he easily change the course of his flight? He hurriedly stretched out his body, wanting to use a movement technique. Even if he would suffer a blow to his thigh, he could not allow his A*S to suffer. But his body had just stretched out when this strike had already reached him. Pooh, half the spear had instantly directly sunk in. Who asked him to deliberately stretch out his body, as if he was welcoming the penetration of the iron spear? "Oh!" he screamed in agony, his whole person stretching out into a straight line. "Disgusting!" Ling Han hurriedly flicked his hands, and tossed Fei Yun out. Pang! Fei Yun fell down from the skies, crashing heavily onto the ground, and producing a cloud of dust. He maintained a sprawled-out posture, while there was still a shaking spear that was stuck in his behind. In truth, he had not fainted. This kind of attack was not strong enough to cause him serious injury, but the crux of the matter was that this was a humiliation, so he did not even dare to raise his head. As a noble monarch tier, one that was ranked 6th even in the wide prosperity heaven, he had actually been A*S raped in public? Instantly, everyone from the wide prosperity heaven felt like they had a common enemy, turning their furious eyes on Ling Han, while feeling like Ling Han had humiliated the entire wide prosperity heaven. Public enemy. Ling Han was unconcerned. Since they were going to fight over the fiery flame lightning strike wood, he was going to defeat all order prodigies. Even if you hate me, go ahead. Worst come to worst, I will just suppress all of you. However, even though they hated him, not one person jumped out to challenge Ling Han. Fei Yun was a good example. Why isn't Lord Yi here yet? What about Fairy Shu? How about Tang Minglong? The prodigies of the wide prosperity heaven all called out loudly, their emotions excited. Yi was the existence that was ranked at the top of severing mundane tier in the wide prosperity heaven. No one knew if it was his surname that was Yi or his actual name that was Yi, or if it was actually just an alias. He was an extremely mysterious person, but his strength was astonishingly amazing, and it was undebatable that he was ranked first. Xu Yarong, the number 1 beauty of the wide prosperity heaven, who was also number 2 in the rankings of severing mundane tier. Meanwhile, Tang Minglong was ranked 3rd. The strength of these three was clearly a level stronger than the other monarch tiers. Thus, the prodigies of the wide prosperity heaven were sure that as long as these three arrived, any of them would be able to suppress Ling Han easily. In such an excited atmosphere, no one noticed that Fei Yun had quietly dug a hole, and had already crawled in. Then, he dug deeper and deeper, climbed further and further. He had fled. Ling Han walked back to his original spot, and saw that Yan Xianlu and the others were all looking excited. Brother Ling! Brother Ling! Lord Ling! This was too awesome, standing up strongly for the calm peace heaven. It should be known that ever since they had come, the people of the wide prosperity heaven had all looked contemptuously at them, looking down very much on the calm peace heaven. But now? Reality had smacked them hard in the face. Weren't the monarch tiers ranked 6th and 9th still sent off in defeat? Shi Xiuwen fortunately had run off fast enough, or he would be A*S raped too. They all discussed spiritedly, and everyone felt regretful that Shi Xiuwen had not been A*S raped as well, which involuntarily made Ling Han sweat madly. He probably hadn't started a trend of A*S raping, right? That scene was too filthy and too violent, and he dared not think more about it. Too bad. Even Hu Niu looked regretful. Niu actually did not think of such a fun thing. Her eyes lit up, and her gaze swept over the gathered masses from the wide prosperity heaven, looking very much like she wanted to catch one of them for an experiment. Not good, this girl was a curious kitten. He definitely could not allow her to learn such a despicable move. Ling Han hurriedly wrapped Hu Niu in his arms, changing the topic to food. Instantly, Hu Niu was drooling, and she had successfully forgotten the action of A*S raping that was completely unfit for girls to do. So close. Chapter 1959, Top-Grade Monarch Tiers Arrive. Another day later, an important figure from the wide prosperity heaven finally arrived. Tang Minglong. Just hearing the name of this person would make it very easy to imagine a broad-shouldered man with tall build, but in truth, he was a dwarf. His figure was covered with wrinkles, and he had a head of gray hair. No matter what, no one would probably be able to connect him with their image of a top-grade monarch tier. But it was rumored that this was the reincarnation of a celestial king. No one knew why a celestial king had to choose such an unbearable body, nor did they understand why the celestial king had not mended this body with his own ways. To all severing mundane tiers, this would only be a piece of cake, so it could not possibly be difficult for a celestial king to accomplish. If the rumors were true, and Tang Minglong was really the reincarnation of a celestial king, further thought would bring the realization of just how incredibly terrifying the new generation of the wide prosperity heaven was. If even the reincarnation of a celestial king could only be ranked third, then just how powerful could Yi and Xu Yarang be? Lord Tang. A considerable number took the initiative to stand and greet him, and only the monarch tiers were relatively more reserved. So what if you were a celestial king? You had already dropped down to rock bottom, and all of us would be able to become celestial kings in the future, so who would have to fear anyone else? What everyone respected would always be true strength. Tang Minglong was standoffish, appearing to be slightly antisocial. Someone who had loose lips immediately pointed at Ling Han, and called, "Lord Tang, this person has insulted our whole wide prosperity heaven." Tang Minglong looked over. However, there was only a hint of confusion in his eyes. He did not speak up to ask further. That person hurriedly related the matters that had happened previously, and then looked at Tang Minglong impatiently, hoping that he would stand up angrily, and seek recompense for the wide prosperity heaven, as well as stamp down completely on the calm peace heaven. Trash was still trash after all. When Tang Minglong heard all this, his eyes turned on Ling Han and Hu Niu. His gaze flickered slightly. Then, he closed his eyes, and sat down in a cross-legged position on a huge rock, looking like he did not want to be disturbed by such trivial matters. Everyone from the wide prosperity heaven was disappointed by this, yet they could not compel Tang Minglong to make a move. They could only hope that Ling Han and Tang Minglong would meet each other after the Three Blooms Valley opened. We don't need to wait that long. When Lord Yi is here, he will definitely step out to suppress Ling Han, someone said with full confidence. This won the agreement of many, and even the monarch tiers looked reverent. They were all monarch tiers, but he was too strong, reaching the point that even they could only look up at him. In the blink of an eye, another 2 days had passed. All of a sudden, fragrance diffused in the wind, and multiple beautiful blooms floated down from the skies. However, when one stretched out his hand to touch it, he would realize that these weren't real flowers, but mere images. However, the fragrance was real. Fragrance wafts 10,000 miles, Fairy Shu is here. Immediately, everyone from the wide prosperity heaven became excited. Xu Yarang. Not only was she the #1 beauty of the wide prosperity heaven, she was also the second strongest elite of the severing mundane tier. Under these two halos, it was natural that she would seem like a goddess from the 9 heavens, noble and graceful. Very soon, a white figure was rapidly coming from the distance. She was an extremely beautiful woman. She was dressed in snow-white robes, with multiple colorful butterflies on her skirts. Occasionally, they would flap their wings and fly, but they would immediately soon turn into bits of light and disappear. These were not real butterflies, but something formed by regulations. Ling Han couldn't help but feel his heart jolt. This woman had not deliberately channeled any technique. This was the automatic manifestation of Great Tao, which was extremely shocking. This was the effect brought on by a divine fetus. Fairy Shu. Fairy Shu. Fairy Shu. All those from the wide prosperity heaven approached to greet her. Even Tang Minglong couldn't help but open his eyes, and glanced at Xu Yarang's face. His wrinkled face showed a strange expression, and then he closed his eyes back again. He continued to meditate, appearing to be unconcerned by all else. Xu Yarong was exquisitely beautiful. Though Lu Han was also a beauty, and she was ranked just below her, when the two women stood side by side, one would discover that Lu Han was obviously inferior to the former. However, everyone had no choice but to admit that whenever Xu Yarong had appeared in the past, she would immediately become the sole center of attention of the whole area, but it was a different case now. Her charms were completely suppressed by another woman. Hu Niu. No matter from which angle they looked at it, it was Hu Niu that was superior. Though this little girl did not have much of an image, just see, she was already eating in public, one hand holding a chicken thigh, and her mouth oily from her Fudanion's heart would still be moved by her beauty. To say nothing of Hu Niu, even those two women by her side were similar. One's face was veiled, but her figure was perfect and flawless. Furthermore, she had an unmatchable noble air. She could captivate anyone without any need to show her true appearance. The other was seductively beautiful. Her almond-shaped eyes were capable of saying words, enchanting and alluring. Xu Yarong had clearly discovered their presence as well. She looked towards Hu Niu, and a hint of shock flashed through her eyes. There was also an indescribable look in her eyes, a very complex mixture of astonishment and reverence. Naturally, another began to make complaints to Xu Yarong, trying to sow discord. Xu Yarong only smiled slightly. Instead, she nodded at Ling Han and Hu Niu, and then walked to one side, waiting silently for the Three Blooms Valley to open. Fine, Xu Yarong was not willing to move, either. They could only anticipate then. This guy was incredibly vicious, and would start a fight at the slightest disagreement. He did not care whether he was in the right or not. He only had to beat his foe into submission, so even if he had been wrong, he would become right. Come quickly. One day passed after another. Time passed very quickly. Though several other emperor tiers had come aside from all the other monarch tiers had arrived, there was still no trace of A very great change occurred in the Three Blooms Valley. These several days, wild winds filled the air, as if they intended to break through the heavens. Boom, multiple streaks of fire would occasionally soar skywards, and there would be bolts of lightning striking down as well, as if some existence was undergoing the heavenly tribulation. The fiery flame lightning strike wood is about to appear. Many cried out, appearing incredibly expectant. Source power of heaven and earth could only be obtained through a stroke of fate. Who knew, it might be them that were the fated ones. For this kind of bizarre scene to appear, it meant that the opening of the Three Blooms Valley would be within the next 2 to 3 days. But where was he? Why was he still not here? One day later. Xiu, a flood of arrows appeared in the skies, shooting rapidly down from the skies, and enshrouding everyone that was standing at the entrance. Who dares to be so insolent? Humph! Damn it! Everyone moved, and dispersed this wave of attack. This was an Emperor tier level attack. Thus, some looked strained, but for Monarch tiers, it could not be easier to deal with. Xiu, another arrow streaked past, shooting straight for a Monarch tier. How dare you! That Monarch tier shot out a punch. Pang, the arrow of light shattered, but a flash of blood flickered across that Monarch tier's fist. He had actually been wounded by this blow. Everyone inhaled sharply. Clearly, the last attack had not been delivered with the full force of the person who had launched the sneak attack. Xiu, another arrow shot over, but this time, the target had been switched to another person. One arrow followed another. These attacks were all very crafty, shooting from different angles. It was like the sneak attacker was unleashing his attacks from different locations. Even top-grade Monarch tiers like Ling Han, Hu Niu, Xu Yarong, and Tang Minglong were being attacked. Who is the bastard that dares to sneak attack Niu? Hu Niu jumped up, flying into a thunderous fury. The Empress was fiddling with an arrow in one hand, and the beautiful face under the gauzy veil also showed a hint of anger. Someone actually dared to launch a sneak attack on her? Ha ha ha. Following a loud laugh, a young man strode out, his hands holding a silver bow that was about half a foot long. I am Ji Wuming, and hereby greet all of you. Chapter 1960, Wuming, Celestial Tool. Ji Wuming? They all exchanged looks, and then shook their heads. This person was really Wuming. None of them had heard of this character. However, everyone immediately looked furious. This man attacked them without distinguishing any target, and had provoked so many people all by himself. Just how outrageously bold could he be? What is the meaning of this? A monarch Tyr asked with forced patience. The reason why he had asked instead of directly attacking was because the attacks that Ji Wuming had previously launched were all too weak. Without absolute uncertainty, how could anyone dare to make a move? What if it led to his own embarrassment? Moreover, there were still such top-grade monarch Tyrs like Xu Xiuwen, Tang Minglong, and Ling Han present. Even if anyone were to stand up in resistance, it would not be them, right? I just wanted to take a look at all your strength, Ji Wuming stated calmly. This kind of answer caused a great many to be outraged. Just because he wanted to take a look at their strength, he attacked them without any prior warning? What if they were injured then? Of course, no one would say such words. How could it be that cultivators feared battle? The people of the wide prosperity heaven all looked at Xu Xiuwen and Tang Minglong, while the people of the calm peace heaven looked towards Ling Han and Hunyo. However, Xu Xiuwen and Tang Minglong were only staring at Ji Wuming, or to be more exact, staring at the white bow in his hands. Hunyo gave a soft and said, I seem to have a little recollection of that bow. She thought for a while, then clapped her hands suddenly, and declared, that is the minor heaven's complete bow. What? What? Ling Han hurriedly asked. Hunyo nodded, looking very serious and solemn, and said, Nyo isn't very clear either. I just have some vague recollection. That is a celestial tool, and belongs to the very, very powerful category even among celestial tools. That's right, minor heaven's complete bow. Xu Xiuwen continued. The bow is made from the trunk of the world tree, while the string is made from a main tendon of a ninth heaven immortal dragon. One only has to pull the bow string slightly, and it would be able to shatter the heavens. World tree, ninth heaven immortal dragon. Among the source powers of heaven and earth, the world tree was one of the 9 great ancestral woods. A bow made from this wood should be unsurpassed by anything else. At most, another object would only be able to catch up to it. And the main tendon of a 9th heaven immortal dragon was even more frightening because the source power of heaven and earth could only represent celestial King Tyr, while a 9th heaven immortal dragon represented the pinnacle of celestial King Tyr. Merely these two objects were already supremely precious treasures, but now they were put together, and used to construct a celestial tool. The value of this was practically unimaginable. Hence, though this thing looked so small it seemed like a toy, its might was incredibly astonishing. If news of it spread out, even celestial kings would be tempted. Whether it was snatching it in public or stealing it secretly, they would definitely make a move. Even Ling Han was a little tempted, but as long as others did not come to trifle with him, he would not think of stealing just because someone else had something precious. Of course, the fact that Ji Wuming had attacked him without rhyme or reason just now was already enough reason to make Ling Han angry, and thus make a move. Hee, not too bad. Ji Wuming laughed. Everyone, the opening of the Three Blooms Valley is close at hand. A source power of heaven and earth will appear. You all don't mind if you have an additional competitor, right? Sir, which heaven do you belong to? Xu Xiuwen asked. Traveling the world, not belonging to any heaven. Ji Wuming gave a very vague answer. In truth, due to the fact that he called himself Wuming, it would be very, very hard for others not to pay particular attention to his identity. A top-grade monarch tier, and one that had a top-grade celestial tool, appeared out of nowhere. Why did everyone think that there was something off about this? Shi Xiuwen calmly said, everyone has a share of natural treasures. Obtaining it would have to depend on your own fortune and strength. I am quite confident in my own strength, though, Ji Wuming answered with a smile. His eyes swept over the gathered masses, a strange smile curling the corners of his lips. Then, he sat down at the side as well, closing his eyes to rest. Everyone was infuriated by this. This guy had just launched an offensive against them, and now he actually dared to sit down right in front of them, looking like nothing whatsoever had happened. How could they not be angered by this? But neither Shi Xiuwen nor Tang Minglong looked like they had any intention of making a move, so the people of the wide prosperity heaven all wilted. On the side of the calm peace heaven, Ling Han was quite intrigued. He had a feeling that this Ji Wuming was the same level as Shi Xiuwen and Tang Minglong, and was worthy of being a strong rival for him. This caused his fighting spirit to begin blazing. Very good, he could now fight to his heart's content. The mystery realm has opened. Just at this moment, someone suddenly cried out. At the entrance, the mist was rapidly dissipating, revealing a valley path that was slanting downwards. It was very wide, about 3,000 meters wide, and it was very even, as if it had been sliced out with blades. Really, there were clear signs of the rocks having been sliced. It was absolutely impossible that these marks had been created through wind erosion. It is said that when the ultimate celestial kings battle, their battlegrounds could possibly transform into a natural mystery realm, someone said slowly. This Three Blooms Valley had also been formed in that way. Ahead of them, the mist was dissipating even faster and faster, as if it had suddenly been absorbed by the ground, and their vision became incredibly clear. Let's go. Someone immediately leaped out, entering into the valley. It was fine even if they were not the strongest. They only had to be the one to arrive first in front of the fiery flame lightning strike wood, and then they would gain a chance of being selected. Which one of those gathered here was not at least an emperor tier? Wasn't an emperor tier impressive enough? Thus, the stupid bird would fly first. Let's go too, let's go too. Hunyo shouted in excitement, arms wrapped around one of Ling Han's arms. All right, we'll go too, Ling Han said smilingly. He first drew the heavenly phoenix divine maiden into the black tower. Those whose cultivation levels had reached the dividing soul tier or further than that could not enter, but it did not mean that those below the severing mundane tier could easily enter. It only permitted severing mundane tiers. Hunyo ran energetically ahead. She was practically dragging Ling Han along with her, while Ling Han and the Empress walked side by side. Finally, the last person was bewitching Maiden Ro, looking a bit like a wife that had been bullied. In the past, she only feared the Empress, and now there was another Hunyo. Both of them could restrain her easily. The Empress was majestic and stern, born as a ruler, while Hunyo was completely unreasonable. If you did not obey, she would just beat you up, and continue beating you up until you obeyed. Yan Xianlu and the others also moved out. They had long since formed an alliance. They could use a formation to oppose an existence stronger than themselves. Hence, they similarly were filled with confidence. The contest was going to begin from this moment. Getting a source power of heaven and earth naturally could grant them a complete rebirth, so they could make up for the distance that separated them from top-grade monarch tiers. The path in the valley was slanting downwards, and the further down, the wider the path became. Occasionally, underground gases would spray out, turning into incredibly beautiful blooms of great Tao. But no one dared touch them. The slightest touch would result in either death or injury, and it would be serious injury at that. It was even possible that they would never be able to heal such injuries. These blooms did not have roots, and would slowly float. One had to dodge them at the first instant. Though they were floating very slowly, it was like they were capable of instant teleportation. In truth, they were not the slightest bit slow. Thus, one had to maintain absolute caution against them. Furthermore, the further down, the more the number of these blooms of great Tao would increase. They were close to covering the entire path in the valley, so one did not know where it was safe to set his foot. Ling Han and his group were all cautious. Now that they were here, even Hunyo did not dare to be rash. This made the little girl very displeased. Her lips pouted, her unhappiness written all over her face. Thankfully, only the blooms of great Tao were floating around. If an enemy suddenly appeared at this moment, it really would not be easily dealt with. An entire 3 days later, the path of them finally became even. Had they reached the bottom of the valley? Whom are the funeral bells ringing for? A low voice rang out. Chapter 1961, Regulation of Slaughter. A person had appeared ahead of them. However, it was really very difficult to use the word person to describe him. He could only be considered a human-like figure. His body was covered with sharp spikes of varying width, some thinner, and some thicker, appearing very bizarre. These spikes were completely unlike adornments, but rather seemed to be growing directly from his body, and looked very natural. Ling Han and his group were surprised. This human figure had to be a being of the Three Blooms Valley. Otherwise, they definitely had not seen such a monster come in with them, and one that had managed to rush ahead of them at that. This place was actually capable of nurturing living beings? They did not hear Yan Xianlu speak of this. Ling Han did not think that Yan Xianlu would deliberately hide this kind of information. Of course, it was also impossible that the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King had deliberately concealed it from his beloved disciple. Then, there was only one reason, and that was this monster had been birthed only in the last 100 million years. It could be tens of millions years ago, or hundreds of thousands of years ago. In fact, it could even be as recently as 3 to 5 days ago. How could the mysterious and profound nature of nature be easily guessed? And whom are the war drums made for? This human-like monster continued, his voice very low. Accompanied by the tone that he was using, he seemed like an old soldier that had lived through many battles, relating his reflective thoughts of war. Stupid monster, why are you acting all mysterious? Isn't it just because you want to fight? Come, Nyo will oblige. Hunyo called out loudly, but before the human-like monster made a move, the Empress had already charged out. Boom, she shot out a punch, and Sword Chi danced madly. Wayaya, you are so despicable, this is Nyo's. Hunyo stomped in fury, and charged out as well, attacking that human-like monster. Now that she had made a move, the strength of the human-like monster was clear to see. Yang Soul. Against severing mundane tier, this should be completely one-sided. Unfortunately, whether it was the Empress or Hunyo, neither of them were ordinary severing mundane tier, but rather fifth severance monarch tiers. In terms of cultivation level, they were equivalent to Yang Soul, and in terms of battle prowess, they could still be invincible in a battle against an opponent that was one cultivation level higher than them. Which also meant that they could defeat even Yin Soul elites. Under the combined forces of these two women, how was this human-like monster supposed to resist? Pung, pung, pung. In a chaotic tussle, he was very quickly beaten up. What was strange was the fact that this human-like monster did not have a body. Under the masses of spikes, the body was actually empty. There was only a crimson stone that was like its heart. However, it was only as big as a segment of a pinky. Why do you have to fight with Nyo? Hunyo was not willing to give up the matter, and glared at the Empress. The Empress, meanwhile, couldn't be bothered to give her any regard, looking like she was treating her like a child, so she would not lower herself to Hunyo's level. Despicable witch. Hunyo stomped in fury, clinging on to the Empress tirelessly. She was determined to get a reply. There were times when she was really very obstinate. Ling Han, meanwhile, picked up that crimson stone. However, his hand had just touched it when a boundless red immediately surged out in his mind. Shadows of swords and blades presented a complete massacre. He immediately showed an expression of shock, and exclaimed, "Regulation of slaughter." The Black Tower also contained regulation of slaughter, and he had attained a superficial comprehension thereof, so he was not the slightest bit unfamiliar with this regulation of slaughter. The Empress was immediately interested, and came closer to see. Hey, witch, you haven't said why you have to fight with Niu yet? Hu Niu said, unrelenting. Regulation of slaughter? Bewitching Maiden Ro also approached, similarly filled with interest. You're saying that this contains the regulation of slaughter? The regulation of slaughter was outside of the 5 elements and lightning. Usually, there would completely be no chance to study it, so it was incredibly precious. Ling Han glared at her, and retorted, even if there is, it's none of your business. Bewitching Maiden Ro was irritated. This unromantic rude boor, she really wanted to strangle him. Ling Han tossed the stone to the Empress. He had the Black Tower, and could study the regulation of slaughter at any time, so he did not need this kind of thing. The Empress would naturally not act reserved with him, and put the blood-colored stone away. Bewitching Maiden Ro pouted slightly. She, too, wanted it, but Ling Han didn't even bother to ask her. He really was despicable. Which, Niu is speaking to you? Hu Niu was abruptly still unwilling to give up. With Hu Niu constantly pressing for an answer, they walked ahead for about 2 to 3 miles, and another human-like monster covered completely with sharp spikes appeared again. Hu Niu screamed, and hurriedly made the first move to attack. Very soon, she killed this monster. As expected, the sharp spikes fell, and it was completely empty inside, except for a small stone that was as red as blood. It's still regulation of slaughter. Ling Han nodded, and then tossed the stone over to the Empress again. Because the valley had become completely even here, and there was nothing resembling a path, but it had rather become a massive plain, they were like stones that had been thrown into the ocean, not creating even the slightest ripple. Everyone would definitely have chosen a different direction, and after walking for an extended distance, this difference would be huge. Thus, Ling Han and his group did not catch up to the people ahead of them, nor were they surpassed by those behind them. Whether they were still in the lead, or had fallen behind, they had completely no idea. Who? A strange animal sound rang out, and a weird demonic beast appeared ahead of them. From the looks of it, it should be a hog, but it was similarly covered with sharp spikes, which instantly made its size double, giving off a twisted feeling of pressure. I'll go. Bewitching Maiden Ro was the first to move. If this monster was still killed by Ling Han, the Empress, or Hu Niu, she would not be able to bring herself to ask for a share of the precious gems that contained the regulation of slaughter. But if she took the initiative to attack first, then even if she would only be watching from the sidelines for the rest of the battle, she could still bring herself to shamelessly ask for a share of the loot later, right? She moved directly. Her slender hand shook, and a wooden sword appeared in her hands, which she slashed out towards the blade hog. Xiao, sword chi surged out, turning into a brilliant light. This strike was struck on the blade hog, but not even a single spike had been severed. Instead, it made this blade hog focus on her, and a murderous aura instantly surged over. Bewitching Maiden Ro's beautiful face paled, and she almost passed out. This was regulation of slaughter, which was incredibly frightening. Even Ling Han's expression changed immediately, and he exclaimed, "Not good, this thing is Earth Soul level." Hong, long, the blade hog charged towards Ling Han and his group in a flurry of its hooves. Come, let's give it a try. Ling Han's fighting spirit was ignited, and he greeted it with a punch. Pung! Ling Han was immediately sent flying, so fast that his figure was like a cannonball that had been shot. Ling Han had been sent flying for close to several hundred miles before he finally managed to slow himself down. He saw that the part of his robes covering his abdomen had been torn, revealing a circular wound, and traces of blood had also appeared on his abdomen. He had actually suffered injury from this blow. Earth Soul level battle prowess was indeed terrifying. Ling Han rubbed his abdomen, and gritted his teeth. As expected of regulation of slaughter. Otherwise, merely Earth Soul alone would not have been able to damage his physical body so easily. This little injury was not enough to drive him into a breakdown, but the problem was that his attack was far inferior to his defense. Fighting with this blade hog only meant that he would be barraged with attacks, so what was the point? Flee? Hide into the Black Tower? Ling Han shook his head. In a motion of space teleportation, he instantly appeared in front of that blade hog. He drew the divine demon sword, and delivered a strike. Wuming, majestic light unleashed in all directions as sword chi filled the skies. The blade hog naturally would not be afraid. With a shake of its body, countless spikes shot out, blasting towards Ling Han. In that short instant, this blade hog had turned into a naked hog. Ling Han stretched out a hand, and lightly said, "Time, stop." Wuming, whether it was the blade hog, or the spikes and blades that were filling the skies, they all entered into a paused condition at the same time. Chapter 1962, Celestial King Bloodstone. This was not Ling Han's ability, but rather the Black Tower's might. When the flow of time slowed down to the maximum, the result was immobility. Shua, the divine demon sword swept out, and with a high-quality hog's head flew skywards out of nowhere. However, it instantly vanished, and the body of the hog also collapsed, similarly breaking into bits and pieces, and leaving behind only a single stone as red as blood. Who? Ling Han used the divine demon sword like a cane, continuously panting, his expression very ugly. The price for using this move was too massive, exhausting him completely. It was not only his origin power, but also his soul. His whole person seemed to have become a blank piece of paper, where the only thing remaining was emptiness. He could use time acceleration and deceleration as he liked, but the more serious the effects, and the wider the range, the more it would take out of him. This apex immobility of time made Ling Han directly lose all ability to continue battle. Furthermore, this move could only be used once a month in real time. It was useless even if he went into the time cultivation chamber. The Black Tower would need to draw out a certain energy from real space. Ling Han, you are so awesome. Hunyo immediately pounced. You managed to kill even an Earth Soul level monster with a single move. So awesome, so great, Nyo wants to have kids with you. Everything the little girl said was all for the sake of the last line, yet Ling Han was only willing to embrace her and kiss her, which made Nyo very displeased. Peng, Ling Han was immediately pushed down by Hunyo. At this point, he did not have the slightest bit of strength left. Hunyo giggled, and planted kisses on Ling Han's face non-stop. Not only did she kiss him, she also licked and bit him, acting very much like a little kitten. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ro was incredibly stunned. That creature just now was an Earth Soul level monster? And Ling Han had actually killed it with a single strike? Just how strong was he? Yet she did not know that this was not Ling Han's own battle prowess, but rather the might of the Black Tower. It could only be used once a month, and had almost drained Ling Han completely. If there were a few more enemies, that would only be a suicidal action. However, this time she could shamelessly pick up that blood-colored stone. But the moment she moved, she saw that the Empress grabbed the stone in her hand with a wave of her hand. "Sister," she called out plaintively. The Empress swept a stern eye on her, and said, "I have my own plans on the allocation." "Oh. bewitching maiden Ro twiddled her fingers. In front of the Empress, she would not have the slightest temper. "Girlie, get up." Ling Han was almost suffocated by Hunyo's kisses, yet the other two women did not seem like they had any intention of giving him a hand. Hunyo giggled, and said, "Let's have babies." This was constantly in her mind. Ling Han began to lecture her righteously again, and took out a considerable amount of food before the little girl temporarily forgot about the matter of having babies. He recovered some energy, and finally could stand up and walk around. "What stone is this exactly?" "It actually contains a sliver of regulation of slaughter." Ling Han had the Empress take out all the blood-colored stones. The stone that represented the Earth Soul monster was very clearly much larger. "This is Celestial King Bloodstone." Small Tower suddenly spoke up. In an intense Celestial King tier battle, blood splatters on the ground, and these stones have been stained with a sliver of Celestial King tier blood, yet had not shattered. After countless years of development, a strange change has taken place, Small Tower explained. Realization dawned on Ling Han. No wonder there had been strange human-like creatures and demonic beasts, but when they were killed, there was no actual body. As it turned out, the root of everything was the blood that had been left behind by the Celestial King. As expected of a Celestial King. He had merely spilled a little blood, yet after countless years, it could actually result in such a shocking mutation. Then this Celestial King must have cultivated the regulation of slaughter, he surmised resolutely. At least 7th Heaven Celestial King. Small Tower also made its own deduction. It looked like the rumors were not false. A great many natural mystery realms had been the battlegrounds that had been left behind after Celestial Kings battled, and contained the immortal and ageless will of the Celestial King. After countless years of development, the power of heaven and earth would also be added in, so it would become a natural mystery realm. Ling Han nodded, and said to the Empress, "Put them away. Looks like we should be able to encounter more of such monsters, and collect even more Celestial King Bloodstones." He roughly outlined Small Tower's words to them. Ordinarily, one could only cultivate the regulations of the 5 elements and lightning, while other regulations could only be gained through specific celestial medicine or certain unusual treasures. However, these regulations were more powerful, and could be maintained until right before Celestial King tier. Hence, the value of these Celestial King Bloodstones was extraordinarily high. From a different perspective, the value of the Black Tower was what was truly astounding. It actually contained the 3 regulations of slaughter, time, and space. If Ling Han comprehended these regulations, and was still unable to become an emperor that destroyed all his peers, then he really would be trash. The 4 of them continued on their way, and very soon, they encountered another human-like monster. Hunyo and the Empress rushed forward together, and dealt with it quickly. But subsequently, they encountered a great dilemma. Another beast-like monster appeared, having Earth Soul level battle prowess, and chasing Ling Han and his group to scramble everywhere. Thankfully, this monster seemed to have a specific range of activity. After they left this range, this monster would also stop, and no longer pursue them. The 4 of them exchanged looks, and suddenly broke out into laughter. In a battle of equals, they had never been chased everywhere by their opponents. This was a very novel experience. After we break through to the Dividing Soul tier, we will be able to beat these monsters easily. Ling Han rubbed his nose. It was unfortunate that Time Stop could only be used once a month. Otherwise, there would have been no need for him to run. However, after we break through to the Dividing Soul tier, we won't be able to enter this place anymore, the Empress said. Nyo can. Hunyo exclaimed, raising her hand. Nyo also has a great ultimate move, and killing these monsters would be as easy as slaughtering chickens. How frequently can you use it? Ling Han asked. Once every 3 months. Hunyo raised 3 fingers. Ling Han nodded, and said, don't waste it on these minor characters. Unless in a life-or-death situation, don't use it. This is to be used to save your life. Okay, Nyo knows. Hu Nyo nodded obediently. They continued to go deeper, and when they encountered Yang Soul and Yin Soul monsters, they would move to kill them. If their opponent was Earth Soul level, they could only break into a run and flee. After these several times, they had also diverted from their original course, but it could be confirmed that they were still heading to the depths of the valley because those 3 peaks were there as their guide, so they couldn't possibly have lost their way. This valley was astonishingly huge, and they weren't able to use movement techniques to sprint at full speed ahead, either. Thus, their speed of traveling was naturally not going to be fast. A whole 3 months had passed, and they still hadn't made it to the middle. That was because they still hadn't reached the foot of the 3 peaks. This would be the sign that they reached the middle. According to Yen Xianlu, there is also great fortune at the foot of the 3 peaks, Ling Han said. But as for exactly what it is, the eternal prosperity celestial king did not tell him. Then let us go and take a look. It should not take too much time. The Empress nodded. They headed to the left mountain peak. 7 days later, Hu Nyo suddenly stopped, and then looked like she was sniffing around. Then, her eyes narrowed. So aromatic. Ling Han naturally believed the nose of a glutton with absolute certainty, and asked, "What do you smell?" "The aroma of celestial medicine." Hu Nyo opened her eyes. "So fragrant, at least 5 billion years old, and has reached small accomplishment at least. Then we need to go and take a look." The 4 of them changed course, with Hu Nyo leading the way. They followed the aroma, and after they walked more than 100 miles, only then did Ling Han and the Empress smell a refreshing fragrance. As expected, they could not compare to a glutton. Chapter 1963, Red Spotted Green Bamboo. The 4 of them advanced rapidly, and after just an hour, a pool that was as black as ink appeared ahead of them. An indescribable stench assaulted them, and there was a green bamboo growing in the center of the pool, long and thin. The green bamboo was like a drooping rod, close to 300 meters tall. It practically had no leaves. There were only 6 leaves growing at its highest point, and they bore a crimson fruit. Now that they had arrived here, the fragrance of the celestial medicine had instead vanished. Red spotted green bamboo. Ling Han immediately exclaimed. By now, he was already familiar with all the celestial medicines in the celestial realm. Even if some celestial medicine had been produced from crossbreeding, he could still discover what its parents were from the slightest clues. Seeing that the 3 women were still a little puzzled, he explained, "This is indeed a celestial medicine, but the portion that is valuable is not that crimson fruit, but rather those 6 leaves. They each contain different regulations of the Great Tao, and if they are consumed together, they would take effect simultaneously. It would be akin to immersing yourself in Great Tao, the effects of comprehension would be amazing. However, this celestial bamboo is a treasure in itself. The bamboo pole can be used to forge weapons. Its toughness is at least comparable to 6-star pseudo-divine metal. The older it is, the tougher it is, and if it has reached 100 billion years old, it would be comparable to 9-star pseudo-divine metal, and can become 10-star pseudo-divine metal after 1,000 billion years. Starry-eyed, bewitching Maiden Ro could not help but ask, then how many years would it need to become divine metal? Divine metal, who did not want it? Ling Han only quirked his lips, and said, the limit is 10-star pseudo-divine metal. It cannot rush up to the heights of divine metal. This is a natural limit. Bewitching Maiden Ro's lips pouted, looking very pitiful. However, in her heart, she was about to go crazy, wanting nothing more than to hang Ling Han up and give him a beating. This damn man was really too unromantic and rude. She was a beauty here, so would he die if he was a little gentler to her? Humph, isn't it just because you want me to dislike you? I won't, I will cling to you, and drive you crazy. And there is that fruit too, Ling Han explained solemnly. Though it cannot be used as medicine, it cannot be called useless. This thing is incredibly and extraordinarily poisonous. The moment the poison makes contact with your hand, it would be useless even if you chopped off your hand. Your whole person would immediately be melted into a pool of blood, which is extremely terrifying. Looking at the color of the bamboo pole, this red-spotted green bamboo should be more or less 6 billion years old. The destructive power of that fruit should be limited to heaven soul, or even immortal palace tier. The three women all paled. That fruit could kill even immortal palace tiers with its poison, and it was through instantly melting into a pool of blood at that. So terrifying. Though they were all extraordinary, especially Hu Niu, who had a precious treasure that could save her life, they could not possibly survive the blow of an immortal palace tier. Ling Han pointed at that incredibly smelly pool, and said, "Look at this pool. It has been formed by the poisonous air that has seeped out of the poisonous fruit." Hearing him say this, the three women hurriedly pinched their noses. No wonder they felt a little dizzy. As it turned out, they had been poisoned. Ling Han shook his head with a laugh, and said, "No need to be so nervous. Only actual contact with the poison would cause harm. If it is just the smell alone, it just smells bad." Even so, looking at the expressions of the three women, they would still withdraw even if it meant giving up this celestial medicine. Women, sigh, women. Ling Han took a few steps forwards, and began to circle around the pool, studying how he was supposed to retrieve this celestial bamboo. He first moved directly, his origin power forming a hand to directly extract the celestial bamboo, but it was as if this celestial bamboo had been joined with the ground here. If he wanted to pull out the celestial bamboo, he would have to pull out the ground here. If this was another place, this actually wouldn't be much of a problem either. With Ling Han's present power, to say nothing of the ground here, even if it was a few dozen stars added together, he would still be able to carry them easily. The problem was that this was a natural mystery realm, and there was a great amount of celestial king blood spilled here. There was some nameless change taking place here, so heaving up the ground here became an impossible feat. He pushed the hand of origin power forwards a bit, but sizzling sounds immediately rang out. The giant hand of origin power was presently being rapidly corroded, and he could clearly see that a giant hand had become a half, and then disappeared completely. Ling Han gave a muffled grunt, and when he raised his hand, he saw that a black seal had actually appeared on the palm of his hand, and it was still spreading. This was the poison of the red-spotted green bamboo. Ling Han hurriedly channeled the indestructible heaven scroll. Wang, golden light appeared on his hand, and an incredibly noble seal appeared, then suppressed, and soon destroyed that black-colored seal. Such terrifying poison. He had not made direct contact at all, and it had still been transmitted over from the giant hand of origin power, and it could still cause such frightening damage even then. Then if it was direct contact with the poison water, that really would mean instantly melting into blood. He would not even have the chance to channel the indestructible heaven scroll. Being capable of killing an immortal palace tier elite with its poison was indeed no joke. Ling Han frowned. This poison should only be transmitted through direct contact, but why had it taken effect when it was just contact with the air here? He took a closer look, and gave an "oh." As it turned out, the temperature of the pool was slightly high, so steam was rising from it. And it was this steam that had touched the giant hand of origin power, transmitting the poison. At the beginning, the giant hand of origin power was at a high enough point, so it had not been touched by the steam, but when it descended slightly, this caused the poison to explode. Ling Han shook his head. This really was a little troubling. How was he supposed to retrieve the celestial bamboo then? He turned to look at the three women. If there were more of them, they should be able to come up with more ideas. The three women all shook their heads. They did not want to risk getting in contact with the poison in the slightest. It should be known that every part of their skin was supple and soft. If it was even the slightest bit damaged, and they were no longer beautiful, what were they supposed to do? Even Hunyo was no exception on this point, no longer as carefree as she had been. Ling Han could only think of an idea on his own. Use the divine demon sword? This was a future celestial tool, and while it was a little weak at the moment, it should be able to resist the poison. Ling Han tried it out, and true enough, the divine demon sword had no fear of the poison, and would not be corroded. However, this weapon was only at the level of 3-star pseudo-celestial tool at present, so what could it do to the toughness of the celestial bamboo? If a 3-star pseudo-celestial tool would be cut by a 6-star pseudo-celestial tool, what justice was there left in this world? Ling Han used another method, wanting to empty out the waters in the pool. Then, he would be able to dig out the roots of this celestial bamboo, and easily retrieve it. But the problem was, what vessel could bear the corrosion of the poisonous waters? The moment lower-level pseudo-divine metal was placed in, it would be turned into dust, and the divine demon sword could not be used like a pail either. Ling Han was stuck in a dilemma. This treasure was just in front of his eyes, yet he could only look at it from afar and lament. His thoughts ran furiously, and he came up with another idea. Burn! Ling Han had the 3 women retreat far away, and then channeled the 9 heavens flame towards the pool. Under such intense and blazing heat, he was sure that this pool of water would soon be burnt completely. That would lead to the same result. Out of Ling Han's expectations, this pool of water was very hard to evaporate. Half a day had passed, and just a little had been burned up. As long as there was an effect, that was fine. Ling Han firmed his will, and decided to just spend his time here. He pushed the 9 heavens flame to its limits. In any case, because of the limitation of his own cultivation level, it was impossible for the 9 heavens flame to release the full might of Celestial King Tyr, so there was no need for him to worry about damaging the celestial bamboo. Additionally, because the 9 heavens flame was a source power of heaven and earth, there naturally would be no need for him to worry about being countered by the poison. Day after day passed, and the water level of the pool was also decreasing bit by bit. He was close to success. Chapter 1964, Climbing the Mountain. The pool's bottom was finally about to appear. Ling Han exerted some more effort, and the 9 heavens flame blazed fiercely, evaporating the last bit of steam. And now, the pool was empty. It was guaranteed that there would not be the slightest bit of liquid left. Ling Han used the divine demon sword like a spade, and began digging in the pool. This took him a further 7 days, and only then did he manage to cleanly uproot the complex system of roots of the celestial bamboo, which he then stowed into the Black Tower. What was unfortunate was that even the Black Tower could not nurture this celestial bamboo, unless it had gained its own intelligence, and could cultivate on its own like the 7 lives divine clouds. Ling Han dealt with the celestial bamboo. Though the fruit was extremely poisonous, it was also very useful, and could be used as a great fatal weapon. He plucked out the leaves of bamboo, which he then placed beneath the reincarnation tree. This could preserve its freshness, locking in the dispersion of the regulations of heaven and earth, and could also further improve its medicinal effects by enshrouding it in the aura of the reincarnation tree. He could not do anything to the bamboo stalk for now, and Ling Han could not extract too much strength even inside the Black Tower. 6-star pseudo-divine metal, he really couldn't process it further. Whatever, he would hand it over to a skilled craftsman to be made into something useful once he went out. Ling Han exited the Black Tower, a smile on his face. After working hard for over a month, he had finally reaped a good harvest. It was not the time to divide the loot now. Hence, the 4 of them immediately continued on their way. After over a month of delay, who knew if it would affect their chances of contesting for the great fortune on the 3 mountain peaks? As they traveled, they naturally encountered a great many monsters again. There were a good few that were Earth Soul level among them. Ling Han did not draw on the power of the Black Tower, but rather used the poisonous fruit of the red-spotted green bamboo to deal with one of them just to test out its effects. He had only used a bit, which he smeared on the tip of the blade of the divine demon sword. But when he delivered a stab, that monster immediately decayed. Of course, Ling Han's body had also been pierced harshly by the spikes of the monster, his entire body bleeding all over, almost damaging his godly bones. It was, after all, a powerful Earth Soul level attack. Even if it had been someone the likes of Yan Xianlu, he would probably have collapsed under such bleeding. But Ling Han had only bled a little. The strength of his physique could really be considered freakish. The poison on the blade only weakened after 7 uses, and by the 11th monster, it practically did not have any effect left. Though Ling Han was pierced all over, he was very satisfied. He was gaining more and more of this Celestial King Bloodstone, which should be enough to allow the Empress and Hunyo to gain a preliminary grasp of the regulation of slaughter. This regulation was really extraordinarily powerful, and anyone who used it would know. Fairy Row. What about me? Me? Because there was no need for them to change course at all, Ling Han and his group's speed naturally increased. Another 2 months later, they finally arrived at the foot of the left peak. From a distance, it seemed like a peak, but upon closer look, this was rather an incredibly colossal mountain, with an unknown perimeter. Anyways, it was just overwhelmingly huge. Wang, there would be occasional veined patterns glowing on the surface of the mountain, as if it had a life of its own, and was presently breathing. Ling Han raised his head, and could see that there were presently a few people that were just beginning to climb. At first, their speed was very fast, but when the veins glowed, they immediately stopped, and held tightly onto the surface of the mountain. They only continued to climb further when the veins had completely dimmed. Ah! Someone suddenly slipped, and dropped down from the skies. There was a regulation of gravity here. It had far surpassed the level that severing mundane tier could grasp. Thus, no one would be able to fly in this place. Peng, he directly dropped onto the ground, creating a deep pit in the ground. After a while, that person finally clambered out of the pit. He was completely covered in blood, a few bones directly piercing out of his body. They were broken, and the bone marrow was visible. How pitiful. That person hurriedly consumed an alchemical pill, then sat down, and channeled his cultivation technique to guide the medicinal effects so that he could recover his battle prowess as soon as possible. It was extremely dangerous to sustain a serious injury in this kind of natural mystery realm. Even if your opponent did not deal you a fatal blow, there would still be other dangers, such as the monsters that rampaged around in this place. Let's go to. The 4 of them began climbing. Now that they had left the ground, they immediately felt how terrifying the gravity was in this place. Even for monarch tiers and emperor tiers like themselves, it was still extremely straining. Ling Han, Nyo wants you to carry me. Hunyo clung onto Ling Han's back. So heavy. Ling Han gritted his teeth. With another person's weight, it was not something as simple as doubling the difficulty. The Empress gave them a glance, and did not say anything, but instead directly ran, and grabbed one of Ling Han's arms. There was nothing that could be done. The best position was already occupied by Hunyo. An idea flashed in bewitching Maiden Ro's mind, and she, too, approached shamelessly, clinging onto Ling Han's other arm. Fuck, do you guys have no arms and legs? Ling Han hissed. The combined weight of 3 people all added onto him alone caused the pressure he had to sustain to increase by at least 100 times, and he immediately felt like his arms and legs were about to be ripped off. And this was because his physique was incredibly tough at that. Otherwise, his arms and legs would have been severed by now. However, this could be considered as a good type of training exercise. Ling Han no longer gritted or bared his teeth. Instead, his expression was solemn as he began to climb. The moment he moved, the gravity increased considerably. Immediately, sweat was pouring down his forehead, and his whole body was soon completely dampened by sweat as well. Wang, the mountain suddenly glowed, and a vein was streaking down from the summit like a lightning bolt. Though this was Ling Han's first experience, with a predecessor in front of him, he hurriedly remained stationary and unmoving, clinging tightly to the mountain with his body. Pang, pang, pang. As the vein surged past, a strong feeling of repulsion also emerged from the mountain, wanting to send everything unfamiliar flying. Thankfully, Ling Han was sticking closely and strongly enough. Otherwise, he would definitely have been sent flying with the 3 women that were on him. No wonder those people would remain unmoving at this time, yet some had still been sent flying down. It was indeed very powerful. Ling Han pulled himself together, and continued his upwards climb. His willpower was incredibly strong. Previously, he had even taken the black murderous curse on to temper himself. This kind of willpower was definitely freakish. Even if he was carrying 3 women, his speed was actually getting faster and faster. He was scaling the mountain like an agile monkey. After an hour, those who had been ahead of him were already within sight. He surpassed them like he was a gust of smoke. That was a man and a woman, and from the looks of it, they seemed to be a couple because they were climbing very closely together. When Ling Han passed them by, the man deliberately leaned towards the woman, obviously protecting her. When they saw how Ling Han was not only advancing like he was walking on flat ground, and was even bringing 3 women with him at the same time, this couple both looked stunned, practically incapable of believing that this was possible. After a while, the woman sweetly said, "Brother Ma, I, too, want you to carry me on your back." "Fine, get on." The man gritted his teeth, and agreed. The woman leaped onto the man, and hung onto him. The man immediately hissed sharply, his forehead all creased. This was really too heavy. Gritting his teeth, he began to climb. But just like with a mortal that was carrying 1,000-pound weight, it was incredibly hard just staying still, and moving was practically capable of killing him. Just at this moment, a vein began to vibrate. The man hurriedly stood firmly on a mountain rock, but with the approach of the strong tremor, there was no way he could possibly hold on to the mountain rock. He had directly been sent flying. Ah! Ah! This couple screamed out simultaneously, a string of curse words streaking through their mind. It was all Ling Han's fault. If he had not been showing off in front of them, how could they have wanted to follow in his footsteps? This highly difficult technique of showing affection in public was indeed not something that everyone could learn. Fuck. The 2 of them soon turned into 2 tiny black dots, no longer seen again. Chapter 1965, Power of Belief. Another month later, Ling Han finally stopped. It was not because they had reached the summit, but rather that the slope had become level and flat here. He did not need to advance by gripping the steep angles of the mountain rocks any longer. The 3 women also reluctantly released their hold. Clinging onto Ling Han was something that they could get addicted to. It was easy for them to lose themselves in his masculine smell. Especially in the case of bewitching Maiden Ro. This was her first time being in such intimate contact with Ling Han. Her face had directly flushed red, and her alluring eyes were as soft as water, indescribably cloying and sweet. Ling Han sighed in relief, and said, "You guys are really quite heavy. In the future, you guys would really have to lose weight." While he had advanced very fast, it did not mean that the weight he had to sustain had become any less. It was only that his willpower was strong, and he had forcibly suppressed his weariness. What woman liked to hear someone say that she was heavy, especially when the speaker was their lover? Hence, Ling Han was ganged up on by the 3 women, and after a bout of soft punches and kicks, the 4 of them finally continued on their way. There was no mountain path here. The craggy mountain rose and fell in succession, every mountain rock was strangely shaped and bizarre. Amidst a ringing cry, a celestial crane appeared, its wings flapping in the air. There was actually a person borne on its back. His brows and beard were completely white, and he looked quite sage-like. The speed of the celestial crane was very fast, and in a few flaps, it had already disappeared at the summit. Ling Han and the others exchanged looks, and could see shock in each other's eyes. What was going on here? A celestial crane had actually appeared in this natural mystery realm? Huh! The four of them exclaimed in shock at the same time because the craggy mountain rock around them had actually disappeared, and a wide, long path of white jade had appeared in front of them, winding all the way to the mountain summit. Even while standing here, it was as if they could see a majestic palace at the summit. Its walls were bronze, and exuded an indescribably imposing air, seemingly capable of suppressing the heaven and earth and time. In fact, they could even see that there were a great many people on the mountain path, worshipping on the whole way, as if they were the most faithful of believers. They would kowtow 3 times with every step, and were advancing to the summit at an extremely slow pace. With every bow, the bronze palace seemed to brighten a slightest bit more. Though this kind of chance was very negligible, Ling Han and his group, being either monarch tiers or emperor tiers, could still feel this kind of change. This is power of belief, Hunyo said. Belief is also a type of energy, and is a power that is unique to the world, and would not be controlled by great Tao. Even though a single believer's strength is weak, gathering the power of belief of thousands, of millions of believers would also affect a qualitative change. Ling Han nodded. Something like power of the nation? Not really, because power of the nation would require establishing a nation first, and using the totem as a medium to gather the power of the citizens. Hunyo shook her head. As the heir of a 9th heaven celestial king tier-level force, who also had the brand that had been left behind by a 9th heaven celestial king, her knowledge base was very broad and wide. The height of belief far surpasses power of the nation, and power of the nation would mean a feeling of belonging to this nation, while belief is about the individual, which is completely different. However, the power of belief, too, has its weaknesses. Why would believers want to believe in you? Hunyo paused. That is because believers would encounter dilemmas, and at that time, they would ask the target of their belief for help. If they do not get any response, the believers may lose faith. It may be very, very hard for a believer to encounter a dilemma in 100 years, but once the numbers are increased, that would be great trouble. Ling Han nodded, and said, going by the looks of things, this was definitely the place of enlightenment for a celestial king before, but a great battle happened one day, and everything was destroyed, turning into the model of the Three Blooms Valley. Afterwards, the power of heaven and earth began to transform this place, and thus the present Three Blooms Valley came to be, the Empress continued. Hence, everything is only an illusion. It is the image of prosperity that was left behind from countless years ago, when the place of enlightenment of the celestial king still existed, bewitching Maiden Ro also said. As she spoke, the majestic mountain path and those faithful believers also disappeared all of a sudden. After all, this was only a fragment of the long passage of history, and had long since died, only available for later generations to reminisce. Ling Han and his group sighed slightly. At the time, that celestial king was at least 7th heaven, and he should have been immortal for eternity, but now he had completely vanished in the long passage of history, and even his name was known to no one. Even celestial kings were like this, then what true immortality was there? How could one truly cast away the bonds of life and death, and exist for eternity? Hunyo began to wrinkle her tiny nose again. So fragrant. Another celestial medicine? Ling Han asked. He naturally was incredibly confident in the little girl's sense of smell. Hunyo leaned her head to one side, and after some thought, she said, it should be celestial medicine, but it is a little strange. What's strange about it? Ling Han asked. I don't know how to say it. Anyways, it is just very strange. Ling Han thought for a moment, and then said, whatever the case, let's search for it first. It was still Hunyo leading the way. Not too long after, both Ling Han and the Empress also smelled the fragrance that was unique to celestial medicine. A single sniff was enough for them to know. Their spirit instantly resonated with the great Tao, and was not something that could be replaced by any other substance. They went off in search of the fragrance, and very soon, they found a mountain cave that was incredibly dark. The fragrance of the celestial medicine originated from within the mountain cave. Smell of blood. Hunyo wrinkled her little nose again, showing a ferocious expression. She was especially sensitive when it came to things like killing intent. Was it because those that had previously reached this place had conflicted over the celestial medicine, which had led to a major battle? Everyone, be careful. Ling Han strode forwards, heading to the cave entrance. Now that they were already here, there was naturally no logic in giving up halfway. He naturally would have to take a look. The Empress and the others also followed, but they circled around once inside, yet discovered nothing. The herbal fragrance was there, but there was no sign of the celestial medicine. Perhaps it has already been taken. Let's go. The four of them shook their heads, exited the mountain cave, and continued their way towards the summit. When Ling Han and his group had completely vanished, a person walked out of the mountain cave. It was Wuming. His eyes flickered, and he murmured, all four of them are divine fetuses. If I can swallow them, my divine fetus would definitely be able to improve further. Too bad, those three are not easily trifled with, especially that little girl. She should be the reincarnation of an old friend. Forget it, let's catch enough fish here first, and then think of a way to swallow the divine fetuses of those four people. Someone else is coming. A menacing expression appeared on his face as he slowly retreated into the mountain cave. The refreshing fragrance of celestial medicine drifted out vaguely. A male figure streaked past, and then suddenly stopped. His eyes were fixed on the mountain cave, showing an overjoyed expression. This was a monarch tier of the wide prosperity heaven, ranked 13th, and he had astonishing strength. Inside the cave, vision would be affected, and the space was also limited. If someone lay in ambush to launch a sneak attack, that would be an extremely terrible thing that could happen. But he smiled proudly, and strode forwards boldly. As a powerful monarch tier, what was there for him to fear? Pang! He had not entered for too long when the sounds of intense battle were heard from within the cave. The mountain rock here was frighteningly tough, and even a battle between severing mundane tiers couldn't cause any damage. There were only terrifying storms of energy continuously barraging out of the cave's entrance. However, it had only taken a while, and the cave returned to a state of peace. Wuming walked out, a sliver of blood at the corners of his lips. However, with a lick of his tongue, it was wiped off cleanly. He showed a smile of satisfaction. I am only missing 9 top-tier divine fetuses, and my heaven-seizing fortune technique will reach great accomplishment. Chapter 1966, A Shocking Conversation. If Ling Han and the others were here, they would definitely discover that Wuming's present aura was slightly different from previously. His whole person exuded an evil vibe, but it was one that would not cause discomfort. He slanted his head slightly to the side. Someone else is here, but does not seem an easy target. Xiao, his words had not even been finished when he saw a man with short build appear out of nowhere. His whole face was covered with wrinkles, as if he was about to kick the bucket at any time. Tang Minglong. We should have met, right? Tang Minglong stared at Wuming. Wuming broke into a smile. Hadn't we just given our names a few months ago at the valley entrance? Tang Minglong shook his head. Before that. Wuming shook his head as well. This is my first visit to the wide prosperity heaven, so it should be impossible. Tang Minglong stared into Ji Wuming's eyes, and calmly stated, "What I am speaking of is not your present lifetime." The smile on Ji Wuming's face immediately disappeared, and he stared back at Tang Minglong. The two of them just stared at each other, neither speaking. "I am getting an extremely bad feeling from you." Tang Minglong's face was expressionless. "I do not care if you wreak havoc in other places, but in the wide prosperity heaven, I forbid you from taking one step in. Otherwise, I will kill you." At first, Ji Wuming did not respond, but after a while, a smile appeared at the corners of his lips, and then he broke into laughter. "I know now, you should be that Xiao character, right? I really had not imagined that you, too, would have the chance to transmigrate and reincarnate. Isn't it the same for you?" Tang Minglong asked calmly. Seeing that Tang Minglong did not deny it, the smile on Ji Wuming's face slowly faded, turning into a mocking grin. "Xiao Tianxiong, 8th Heaven Celestial King, with extraordinary battle prowess. Too bad, you have long since died. You are but a lingering spirit that is dragging out your existence, and have gained the chance for a new life, so what could you do to me? I am more than capable of killing you." Tang Minglong declared menacingly, his tone instantly becoming incredibly frosty. If their conversation was heard by other severing mundane tiers, they would definitely pale in shock. Tang Minglong really was the reincarnation of a celestial king, and an 8th heaven existence at that. That was just a step away from the ultimate pinnacle, and in the whole celestial realm, that could be considered a being of the highest tier. But this kind of celestial king had still died, leaving behind only a sliver of his spirit, gone through some kind of reincarnation cycle, and had come back to life. The cultivation of his last lifetime had been severed, and he could only start right from the beginning again. Ji Wuming did not have the slightest bit of fear, and slowly asked, "Xiao Tianxiong, do you know why I wished to reincarnate?" Seeing the unconcerned expression on Tang Minglong's face, he continued, "I did not die in my last life, but have rather given up my body of a celestial king on my own initiative, and barged forcefully into the reincarnation cycle." "What?" At this, Tang Minglong finally revealed an expression of shock. In fact, a layer of goosebumps broke out on his skin, as if he was a mortal that had encountered a ghost. You, he stuttered, incoherent in his words. Ji Wuming bared his teeth in a grin. "Now, it is very hard for me to kill you, but you wanting to kill me is even more impossible. Thus, it is best that we each mind our own business. Otherwise, even if I had to use my trump card a few times, killing you would be a piece of cake." Strangely, Tang Minglong did not refute his words. His whole body was trembling. Even an ordinary 9th heaven celestial king cannot possibly barge forcibly into the reincarnation cycle. Who exactly are you? How many battle merits have you achieved that you would be doted on thus by the heaven and earth? Ji Wuming fell silent, and showed a sliver of rare solemnness in his expression. After a long while only did he say, "I have battled for too long on borders, and I have already forgotten who I am. Since you, too, returned from there, you should know just how grim the situation is over there." "Yes." Tang Minglong nodded solemnly, bearing a sliver of respect, or even reverence. This was extremely shocking. In his last life, he had been an 8th heaven celestial king, practically an elite of the highest tier, yet he would actually show an expression of reverence to another. Then, just what kind of existence was Ji Wuming? 9th heaven celestial king. What was going on? A 9th heaven celestial king would also die. No, going by Ji Wuming's words, it was he himself who had given up his celestial king body, and barged into that whatever reincarnation place, and only then did this completely new and severing mundane tier Ji Wuming come to be. For what reason? Why had he brought hardship on himself? Wasn't a 9th heaven celestial king already an existence of the highest tier, and he still had to give up his own physical body? Those old guys just want to protect themselves without any thought of others. To completely eliminate the storm of darkness, only a heavenly venerable tear can do so. Ji Wuming spoke, his voice slow, but capable of cutting across the ages like the sounding of a temple bell. Tang Minglong appeared to be even more respectful, and said, for the sake of eliminating the storm of darkness, you, Lord, did not hesitate to even give up your ninth heaven celestial king body. This junior is impressed. However, he showed a sliver of hesitation. These young people are presently all hopes for the future, so please have mercy, my lord. For the greater cause, there must be sacrifices, Ji Wuming stated calmly. I can even give up my ninth heaven celestial king body, and risk death just to barge into the reincarnation cycle. I can even make such a sacrifice, so could these young juniors not sacrifice a bit too? Tang Minglong clearly did not agree with his opinion. But there are no buts, Ji Wuming interrupted decisively. Seeing how you, too, have made much contribution at the border, I have spoken so much with you, but if you speak further, I will take your life. Tang Minglong hesitated, but he very quickly said, the only reason I reincarnated was because I wished to return to Celestial King Tyr, and then return to the border to stand against the storm of darkness. My purpose is to safeguard and protect our descendants, but you, my lord, want me to just sit by and watch as you kill the hope for our future. Then, please forgive this junior for being incapable of obeying you. Just like E of the wide prosperity heaven, he is extraordinarily prodigious, and there is a high possibility for him to become a ninth heaven celestial king in the future. He could become the main force in resisting the storm of darkness in the future. Such a prodigy should not die at your hand, my lord, but rather should be given the chance to grow and mature. What short-sighted vision! Ji Wuming declared balefully. All of a sudden, he charged towards Tang Minglong, extending a palm. Boom! The whole world turned into complete darkness, and only this hand that seemed like an eternal existence that seemed capable of striking open the heaven and earth seemed to be left, suppressing all existence. This possessed the might of a celestial king, but it was not the complete might of a celestial king either, so it was like how Ling Han possessed the nine heavens flame. That was clearly celestial king tier level existence, but because it was limited by his cultivation level, it belonged to the celestial king tier in essence, yet its might was considerably inferior to that. Forgive my offense, my lord. Tang Minglong exclaimed softly. Pa, 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 the bones in his entire body crackled loudly, and he instantly turned from a dwarf of short stature to a 7 feet tall man of broad build, exploding in a burst of supreme might. He greeted the incoming attack without fear, righteous and justified. Speaking in terms of their past lives, Tang Minglong was definitely no match for Ji Wuming. An 8th heaven celestial king standing against a 9th heaven celestial king in a head-on confrontation would only result in the former's death. But at present, they were both 5th severance monarch tiers, and limited by their cultivation level, the amount of 8th heaven and 9th heaven celestial king power that they could draw on was actually not much different. Thus, the battle was very intense, and it was hard to determine who would be coming out on top. It was indeed just like how Ji Wuming had said at the beginning. It would not be easy for him to kill Tang Minglong, as he would have to use some kind of ultimate move, but Tang Minglong killing him was a completely impossible feat. The fierce battle was continuing without stopping. Chapter 1967, True Meaning of the Great Tao. After ascending to this height, there were surprisingly fewer obstacles. Ling Han and the others only took a few hours to reach an area near the mountain peak. Mists and clouds swirled, and this place seemed much like a celestial abode. A group of people appeared before them. Xu Yarong, Yan Xianlu, and the others were all among this group. Ling Han walked over, and asked, Brother Yan, why have you all stopped here? Yan Xianlu shook his head with a sigh, and said, Brother Ling, I truly can't bear to tell you. I'm afraid that you'll beat your chest and stomp your feet in frustration. Ling Han involuntarily chuckled, and said, then I'm even more curious to find out. Yan Xianlu nodded before pointing ahead, and saying, there's a stone tablet before us. Fuck. **************************************************************** Do you want to die? Hu Niu immediately shouted. This person actually dared to mess with them. Yan Xianlu faltered upon hearing this. Before Hu Niu, he truly didn't dare to play any tricks on Ling Han and the others. He hurriedly said, this is no simple stone tablet. Rather, it's been formed and nurtured by heaven and earth. Inscribed on it, is the true meaning of the Great Tao. True meaning of the Great Tao? Yes, true meaning of the Great Tao. Ling Han and the Empress both wore expressions of confusion. Meanwhile, Hu Niu immediately jumped forward, rolling up her sleeves, and saying, where is it? Where is it? It's Niu's. She was wearing an expression of greed. What exactly is it? Ling Han asked Yan Xianlu. Brother Ling, what we cultivate and comprehend is the regulations of heaven and earth. However, regulations are formless and intangible, so each person possesses their own unique understanding of the Great Tao. No one can say for sure whether their comprehension is correct, Yan Xianlu said with a serious expression. Ling Han nodded in agreement. This was indeed the case. Even though he possessed two source powers in the Nine Heavens Flame and the Xianin source water, he still needed to use a lot of trial and error when trying to comprehend the Great Tao of heaven and earth. At most, possessing two source powers only allowed this process to become much easier for him compared to other people. However, the true meaning of the Great Tao, Yan Xianlu paused for a moment before continuing, this is something that heaven and earth have formed through some mysterious method. Through this, you can truly comprehend the Great Tao in a leisurely manner. Of course, the true meaning of the Great Tao is only the most fundamental matter. However, the most important thing in cultivation is none other than such fundamentals. Ling Han agreed with this assertion. While in Guanhua City, he had given an in-depth explanation about such fundamental matters. However, even three-star alchemists had been inspired by his explanations, and in the end, they had all viewed him with utmost respect. In fact, they had almost treated Ling Han like their teacher. Regardless of how talented one was, regulations would still be formless. As such, it was almost impossible to obtain a perfect grasp of them. Even Ninth Heaven celestial kings would have some very slight imperfections in their grasp of regulations. However, with the true meaning of the Great Tao, everything would be different. By observing this true meaning, one could fix up their imperfections one by one. By doing so, they could eventually obtain a flawless grasp of the regulations. However, there are far too many regulations in the world, so it's hard to say which one this stone tablet is targeting, Yan Xianlu said. Is there some kind of insurmountable abyss ahead? Why has everyone stopped here? Ling Han asked with a smile. With such a treasure lying ahead, it was only normal that everyone charged forward with courage and excitement. Yet, they were all standing here for some reason. It's not an insurmountable abyss. Rather, it's a sinister dog. Yan Xianlu replied. Dog? I love to pummel dogs. Hu Niu shouted as she roughly pushed her way through the crowd of people. Even though many people stumbled and fell as they were pushed aside by her, none of them dared to say anything. After all, Hu Niu had already become renowned for her hot temper. Thus, they could only shoot a frustrated glare at her. Wow! What a large toad! What an ugly toad! Hu Niu exclaimed. She then ran back in displeasure, pointing at Yan Xianlu, and saying, "Where's the dog? Where's the dog that you promised?" Yan Xianlu was rendered speechless. After a brief moment, he said, "I only mentioned dog as a metaphor. As the saying goes, good dogs don't block the path. Niu doesn't care. Hurry up and give me a dog to pummel." Hu Niu shouted. Ling Han also walked over, only to see a flat platform ahead. There was a large stone tablet resting on this platform, and it looked like it was cut from jade. There were various symbols inscribed into this stone tablet, yet it was as if they were being obscured by a layer of mist. Even with his astonishing eyesight, he could only just make out the first few symbols. However, this was already enough to send billowing waves through his mind. A burst of murderous aura rose, and projections of swords and sabers continued to flash across his eyes. Regulation of slaughter. This was the true meaning of the regulation of slaughter. The others were unaware of this, because they hadn't cultivated the regulation of slaughter before. However, Ling Han had already cultivated this regulation for quite some time, so he immediately felt some resonance upon glancing at the symbols on the stone tablet. No wonder Yan Xianlu described the true meaning of the Great Tao as a precious treasure. Indeed, Ling Han was already experiencing billowing waves in his mind after glancing at just the first few symbols. He obtained countless understandings, and these allowed him to determine many of the mistakes that he had made while cultivating the regulation of slaughter. However, it was a shame that a giant toad was sprawled across the stone tablet, covering a portion of the symbols. In any case, even the uncovered portion was unclear, and it was as if heaven and earth had reached over to cover it from view. I have to get closer to the stone tablet. Anyhow, this toad was no different from the previous monsters. Its body was filled with sharp spikes, and this caused it to look even uglier and stranger than it already was. Ling Han turned around, and asked, "Is this toad extremely strong?" "It's at the heaven soul, so what do you think?" a monarch tear from the wide prosperity heaven said. There was a hint of disdain in his voice, and it was as if he were feeling a sense of superiority. Ling Han involuntarily chuckled, and said, "What are you feeling so smug about? Perhaps I can't defeat Heaven Soul elites, but can you? I truly don't understand where your sense of superiority is coming from." The monarch tear immediately flushed red with anger and embarrassment. However, he was rendered completely speechless, so he could only glare at Ling Han in anger. Indeed, he couldn't defeat this monster either. However, after seeing those more powerful than him also suffering defeat, he couldn't help but feel a mysterious sense of joy. He felt as if they were no better than him. "Brother Ling, a monster at the Heaven Soul has already exceeded the limits of our abilities. If we fight against it one-on-one, that will be nothing more than seeking death. Why don't we put aside the differences between the two heavens first? Why don't we team up to shoo the monster away?" Xu Yarong walked over and said to Ling Han. Hu Niu glared at Xu Yarong and said, "Ugly woman, what are you trying to do to Niu's Ling Han?" She was like a cautious tiger protecting her food. Xu Yarong smiled, and said, "You're more beautiful than me, and your cultivation talent is also superior to mine. That being the case, is there any need to be so afraid of me? Perhaps you lack confidence in yourself?" Hu Niu humped, and said, "Of course Niu is confident. However, one after another, all of you ugly women are overestimating yourselves. Yet, you still insist on sticking your face over." Niu is super annoyed. Hu Niu's words captured a very large group of women. Bewitching Maiden Ro couldn't help but cough upon hearing this. Her expression was slightly awkward. Xu Yarong's smile was still extremely composed and elegant, and she said, "Rest assured, I'm only inviting you to team up with us to deal with that toad." "Fine, since you're so understanding, Niu won't argue with you anymore," Hu Niu said as she grabbed Ling Han's right arm. It was as if she were declaring her ownership. She was a jealous little lover. Ling Han gazed into the distance, and said, "Heaven Soul elites are heaven knows how much more powerful than Earth Soul elites. Even if we team up, our chances of defeating the monster are still slim. But we still have to try. Otherwise, how can we be sure?" Xu Yarong said. "When it comes to such fundamental understandings, the earlier we master them, the better. Otherwise, once we've assembled our tower of cultivation, any deficiency in the foundations might cause a catastrophic collapse. So, if we don't fight for it now, when else will we? Her words were very persuasive. Even though her target was Ling Han, many in the surroundings involuntarily nodded upon hearing this. Even Yan Xianlu was no exception. Ling Han smiled, and said, "Fine, then let's give it a shot." Chapter 1968, Toad. For the sake of the true meaning of the Great Tao, the wide prosperity heaven and the calm peace heaven temporarily put aside their differences. They decided to team up. Before coming here, everyone had already made the necessary preparations. For example, Yan Xianlu, Lu Jia, and the others had already prepared some sort of formation that could greatly increase their battle prowess. This was in order to rival Shi Xiuwen, and the other freakish prodigies. Now, however, this monster at the Heaven Soul was definitely far more powerful than Shi Xiuwen, and the other supreme prodigies. Thus, they had to team up to battle against it. In fact, Ling Han still possessed a trump card. That was the poisonous fruit of the red-spotted green bamboo. What did it matter that this was a monster at the Heaven Soul? A single drop of juice from the poisonous fruit would immediately render it dead. However, Ling Han didn't want to use it now. After all, it was one of his biggest trump cards. As such, it didn't make sense to use it now. Everyone gathered together, yet they were still somewhat separated into smaller groups, each of which was in its own formation. Thus, everyone still seemed disorganized and dispersed. Xu Yang frowned, and said, "What's going on with Tang Minglong? He still hasn't come yet." He was someone who was as powerful as her. If Tang Minglong were here, their chance of success would be much greater. However, they couldn't wait forever. Anyhow, with the addition of Ling Han and Hu Niu, they could somewhat make up for the loss of Tang Minglong. At least, this was what Xu Yang thought. "Listen to my command," Xu Yang said. She was going to command this battle, and this caused the Empress and Hu Niu to feel extremely displeased. Why did they have to listen to her? However, Ling Han didn't care much about this. This was only temporary cooperation, so it wouldn't matter who acted as the leader. Go! Xu Yang took the lead and charged forward, slashing with her sword as she did so. A dazzling burst of light surged forward, carrying with it boundless and undulating regulations. It was as if heaven and earth were going to be forcefully sliced apart as the brilliant sword ray left a trail of darkness in its wake. The others also moved, and almost 100 prodigies unleashed their attacks in unison. Croak. The toad had initially been sprawled over the stone tablet and lazily sleeping. When the prodigies entered some boundary, however, it suddenly opened its sanguine red eyes which were filled with a boundless aura of murder. It shook its body. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sky was instantly filled with spikes, which rained down on the prodigies. Each spike possessed a terrifying murderous aura, and it was as if they were paramount celestial tools that could obliterate all matter. Ling Han didn't know whether these spikes could truly obliterate all matter. However, they could definitely kill those at the fifth severance with ease. He had severely underestimated this toad. Ling Han hurriedly dashed to the side to protect the Empress, Hu Niu, and bewitching Maiden Ro. At the same time, he also channeled the indestructible Heaven Scroll, raising his defenses to the max. Pu, 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 pu. At least 7 spikes smashed into him in unison, unleashing their regulation of slaughter as they did so. Waves of black light swarmed, and they yearned to burn through Ling Han's defenses so that they could forcefully impale him. However, by channeling the indestructible Heaven Scroll, Ling Han could definitely defend against attacks from those at the Heaven Soul. The spikes were unable to penetrate Ling Han's defenses, yet the colossal momentum that they possessed easily lifted him up and sent him flying. Boom! Ling Han and the others crashed into a mountain wall behind them. Rumble! Broken rocks and dust rained down. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others finally came to a stop. However, apart from Ling Han, the three women all spat a mouthful of blood. Even though they hadn't been directly hit by the attack, the collision just then had still wounded them significantly. In fact, only Ling Han was unscathed thanks to the protection of the indestructible Heaven Scroll. As expected of a monster at the Heaven Soul. Its attack is far too terrifying. However, this was only Ling Han's view. As for the others. Just then, Ling Han had neither the time nor effort to concentrate on them. Glancing over now, what he saw was a large group of wounded cultivators. Some had been pierced in the abdomen, while others had been stabbed through the arms or legs. As for those whose divine senses had been breached, it was almost certain that they were dead. Even if they weren't, their expressions were as grim as could be. They were all ingesting treasured medicines or using other kinds of life-saving treasures to suppress the murderous aura of the spikes. Being at the Heaven Soul, this murderous aura would have a crushing power after entering their bodies. It could almost instantly breach their minds and obliterate their divine senses. Thus, for the sake of their lives, what couldn't these prodigies sacrifice? This was a miserable scene. There were hundreds of Emperor tiers and Monarch tiers, yet they couldn't even make it near the toad, and 7 of them had already been killed. In addition, dozens had been severely wounded, and only fewer than 10 had escaped with minor wounds. Xu Xiuwen had naturally only sustained minor wounds. Even though she had led the charge, her title as the second strongest severing mundane tier elite of the wide prosperity heaven was no exaggeration. Her battle prowess was extremely astounding at the very least, her defenses were definitely freakish. However, she certainly wasn't feeling smug at this moment. She was well aware of her own abilities, so there was naturally no need to feel smug. The problem was, how were they going to deal with this toad? It was far too powerful. In fact, she could dispose of this toad all by herself. However, she would need to pay a significant price. Moreover, it would also render her defenseless for a short while. Thus, she naturally couldn't choose this option, especially since there were so many people around. This was unless she could guarantee her safety. However, whom here could she trust? Anyhow, what could they do now? The precious treasure was right before them, so there was no reason to abandon it just like that. In the outside world, those at the Heaven Soul wouldn't have the right to refer to themselves as elites. Only those at or above the Immortal Palace tier had this right. Here, however, a monster at the Heaven Soul was much like an invincible being. Even Monarch tiers were helpless against it. How about, we look for the fiery flame lightning strike wood first, someone suggested. Alright, then you go, someone immediately said in retort. No one was willing to leave at this moment. After all, they had no idea where the fiery flame lightning strike wood was located. This was a colossal valley, so finding the fiery flame lightning strike wood would be no easy task. Moreover, even if they found it, whether or not they could receive acknowledgement from the source power of heaven and earth was another matter altogether. This was in stark contrast to the true meaning of the Great Tao. Upon obtaining it, no, as long as they could carefully observe it, they could definitely increase their own strength and benefit forever. These prodigies were no fools. Which of them didn't understand this? Let Nyo try. Hu Nyo said as she wiped the blood from the corners of her mouth. Her eyes were filled with a dangerous glint. This toad actually dared to wound her. This truly caused her to feel enraged. Ling Han shook his head, and said, "Don't. Leave your trump card until later." He strode forward, deciding to use the poisonous fruit of the red-spotted green bamboo. He had already decided on this earlier. If their cooperation were successful, he would continue to hide the poisonous fruit of the red-spotted green bamboo. If it weren't successful, however, he would then use this trump card. After all, it was always best to leave one's trump card until last. In any case, he was intent on obtaining the true meaning of the regulation of slaughter. Meanwhile, the toad didn't take advantage of the situation to attack them. As long as they left that certain area, it would pay them no more heed. It would lazily lie back down to sleep. However, once Ling Han entered that area again, it immediately opened its eyes to stare at him. Xiao! It leaped forward at an astonishing speed, arriving before Ling Han in a flash. This clearly wasn't teleportation, yet it achieved almost the exact same result. Its blood-red tongue lashed out like a lively spear, aiming to strike Ling Han's face. Pa! This attack was far too quick and far too intense. Ling Han had no time to dodge, and his face was immediately struck. A searing pain instantly shot across his face. It was as if the regulation of slaughter had transformed into a drill that was carving away at his face. Moreover, this was already thanks to the protection of the indestructible Heaven Scroll. Otherwise, this attack would have definitely annihilated his face. Now, it's my turn to attack. Ling Han slashed down with his sword, yet he felt absolutely no resistance. As it turned out, he had already been sent flying by the toad's attack. Hu Niu and the Empress immediately dashed forward to catch him. Ling Han, your face has been smeared with toad spit, so should Niu kiss you in the future or not? Hu Niu asked in a vexed voice. If she kissed him, that would seem far too disgusting. If she didn't kiss him, however, how could she endure this? Thus, she felt extremely vexed at this moment. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.